Hello guys and welcome back to Vive. Today I'm doing a full in-depth review with a complete analysis report covering the final versions of the Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K Plus VR headsets. I was selected as one of the 9 worldwide beta testers of the Pimax 8K M1 device, and during the last 3 months I have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours into testing the 8K headsets almost daily. I've been going through a library of more than 400 VR games and applications looking for issues, flaws and possible enhancements. I've been giving feedback, testing results, opinions and suggestions to the Pimax engineers on how to improve the device and make it as good as possible upon final launch. We have dramatically improved the 8K headset, and the results are now shown in the 2 final mass production units reviewed in this video, the Pimax 8K M2 version and the Pimax 5K Plus. I will make sure to give you my full knowledge and basically everything you need to know about both of the headsets, going all the way from the unboxing to installation, functionality analysis, in-depth testing including loads of recorded footage, VR gaming benchmarks, comparisons between the 8K and the 5K Plus, comparisons with other VR headsets, and we're going down to the roots on how these headsets perform, how they differ, and lastly which one I would prefer the most and of course why. As a follow-up on this review, I will also do a huge number of upcoming videos and live streams here on my channel Vive, going even further into details on the Pimax headsets. So make sure to subscribe now, hit that like button as well as the bell button, and stay tuned for the best Pimax 8K and Pimax 5K Plus coverage you will ever find online. And before we begin, I would also give a huge thanks to all my Patreon supporters and a special thanks to my official sponsor on Patreon, Commander Dark Light. So let's start off by taking a look inside of this fancy Pimax box. Both the Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K Plus headsets have identical looks, identical shapes, as well as identical boxes. So let's just pick one of them for this show. The inside of the box looks very clean, where the headset and only one smaller box is visible. The HMD cable is already connected to the headset, and the box behind holds the rest of this 5-meter long cord. At the far end of this cable we have a splitter, which splits the signal to a DisplayPort and a USB 3 male cable. The splitter also has an input for the external power, but more about that in a moment. Digging deeper into the box, we have an external power adapter which surprisingly has an European plug. As I live in Sweden, I'm very surprised and very pleased about that, and I assume all backers and future buyers will get the correct adapter upon arrival, so we don't need to use any additional converters or travel adapters. At the bottom of this box we'll also find the head strap. The included Pimax head strap in this first batch of the Pimax headsets is rather simple, with only a Velcro strap attachment. The back part is made out of leather and also includes a couple of adjustable inserts for the signal cable going from the headset. All backers of the Pimax 8K and 5K Plus will also get a more rigid and fancy looking auto strap with headphones similar to the PSVR and Samsung Odyssey strap. But as of today, all we know is that the auto strap will be shipped, well, sometimes after launch, hopefully before this year ends. So now let's bring out the beast. The Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K Plus headsets looks like nothing else on the market, I think. The blue chevron on the front, which actually is illuminated with LED lights when powered on, makes the headset look very cocky and unique. At the front side we also have a discreet Pimax logo that is not really screaming loud, but it looks rather stylish, I would say. Nothing really says 8K on the headset except for a small sticker at the bottom side. The whole exterior is made out of matte black plastic, but the plastic feels rigid enough, and the material as well as the finish has slightly been improved from the M1 testing unit and the early prototypes I have put my hands on before. At the bottom we will find a USB-C input as well as a microphone, which looks like a tiny hole on the right side while wearing the headset, and also we'll see a few mounting holes for the upcoming accessories such as the hand tracking unit. So let's turn this baby around and check out the huge lenses. The Pimax lenses are some of the most important parts of these wild field of view headsets, and Pimax team has developed their own custom-made Fresnel lenses with a shape of a fried egg to cover the wild field of view. The lenses covers almost the whole inside, and around them we have a detachable and replaceable facepad or face cover made in foam, and which also has cutouts for making space for using the headset with glasses. In fact, Pimax promises to include 2 different face covers in every Pimax order, one normal size and one thicker size to get more spacing between the lenses and your eyes or glasses. Right below the top part of the face cover, we also have a proximity sensor which turns off the panels when the headset is not worn on your head, and above that another USB-C input, which I will be covering a little bit more later in this video. Taking the foam facepad on and off is very easy as it's held by Velcro straps around the edges. On each side of the headset as well as on the top, we have plastic brackets for connecting the head strap with Velcro. The side brackets are hinged and may look weak, but after 3 months of using them on the Pimax 8K M1 unit, which has the same brackets, I could tell you they won't break that easy. The plastic part that is between the facepad and the headset itself is actually detachable and replaceable. It also serves a purpose to keep the cable connected and not pulled out during intense gameplay. Once you unplug the plastic, you can easily detach the cable, and also you have a very easy accessibility to the lenses in case you need to replace them or pop them out, which I will actually show you a little bit later. Also, making the plastic part detachable will most likely give us a lot of options with third-party plastic accessories and maybe some customized versions for specific face shapes. Now let's have a closer look at the area around the huge lenses. Here we have a fabric tension around the lenses all the way to the edges of the headset, just like the Oculus Rift. The nose area is very big and your nose will most likely fit inside. I would say that even Zlatan Ibrahimovic won't have a problem getting his nose in. What I really miss here is some kind of nose flaps to cover off any light coming in from the nose side while wearing the headset. Even with my big nose, I get some light coming in from the bottom part, and even if it's not distracting for me, I would say that this could be a huge issue for many people. But the Pimax team has already promised us to include free nose flaps in every box, so don't worry if you have an itsy bitsy tiny nose. By disconnecting the HMD cable, we see instantly that it's a custom-made proprietary cable on the headset end. This might not be the optimal solution, I guess, in case it breaks and needs to be replaced, but at least it does look more stylish rather than having 2 or 3 separate cables connected to the headset. On the bottom right side, we'll see the IPD adjustment wheel, and yes, it works just as expected. When you scroll the IPD wheel, the lenses move further away from each other or closer to each other, while the panels inside do not move at all actually. The panel alignment to the lenses for each IPD number is corrected through software, most likely because of the panel size. There's simply not enough room in the headsets to make room for moving the big panels when changing IPD, not on the 8K nor on the 5K Plus. But let's wait with the IPD for a moment. I will get back to this later in more detail. Let's put the plastic part back again and elaborate a little bit with the face cushions again. I'm curious, can we actually fit the 6mm VR cover facepad from my HTC Vive? Well, yes we can. It fits surprisingly well and even looks quite good. Although the very short distance between the lenses and your eyes gets even shorter now, so I would actually not recommend you to use anything thinner than 18mm or at least 12mm unless your eyes are very deep inside your face. Let's also try the HTC Vive original facepad. I could only find the wide face version, but yes, of course it fits. It may not look that pretty, but hey, I mean it's good to have some spare face covers in case you have a VR home party with your friends. I need to add though that the Pimax original face covers feels the best while wearing the headset, but that's probably just a matter of personal taste. So let's attach the head strap now, and I don't think I need to go into any details here. Just connect it with the Velcro straps and we are ready to go. Oh, also, for better comfort, make sure to attach the cable with the included Velcro flaps on the head strap, especially if you want the cable to run at the back of you. The side straps are also elastic enough and the side hinges are flexible, which should fit any head size and shape. Anyway, let's check out the cable again and the external power. The cable feels high quality and rigid. It's exactly 5 meters in length from end to end, same as the Vive and Vive Pro, but remember there is no breakout box here. Or well, the cable splitter may be the breakout box here, I would say. Here is where we connect the power cable, which needs to be connected to the power outlet. Without external power, the headset won't even turn on, as the USB power is apparently not enough, and this is the case for both the Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K Plus. How about the cable length then? Is 5 meters really enough? Well, not really, not even in my small room scale area. I have my desktop PC staying on the floor next to my computer table in the corner of the room, and if I try to use the Pimax for room scale gaming, there is no way I can even turn around. But here comes the good part, guys. You can actually use extension cables for both the DisplayPort and the USB without any issues whatsoever. I tried 3 meter and 5 meter DisplayPort extension cables for less than $7 from eBay, and they both work great, and same goes for the USB. Buy any 3 or 5 meter USB 3 extension cable and it will work just fine. I have been using these no-name cables for more than 3 months now without any issues, no artifacts, no dots on the displays, no data loss, and definitely no delay or latency issues. I have to add though that Pimax will offer a 10 meter replacement cable, which most likely will be released later this year. If you're using a laptop with mini DisplayPort connection instead of full-size DisplayPort, just buy a cheap converter or adapter. I purchased this cheap mini DisplayPort to DisplayPort adapter and it works just fine. If your laptop only has HDMI, then there is still hope. According to Pimax, an HDMI to DisplayPort adapter should work as well, but I have not tested it myself. And according to the German YouTuber Thomas running the channel Voodoo.de, which also by the way is a Pimax beta tester, his laptop, which only had HDMI output, did not work with an HDMI to DisplayPort adapter. So I will leave this unsaid for now and hope Pimax soon clarifies on this or maybe pulls out a custom adapter to the market. Now let's move on. Looking at the top part of the headset, we have 3 different buttons. A power button, which is in fact a standby button instead, and 2 volume buttons, and I will get back into the button functionality a little bit later. The overall finish of the top side may not look like something Apple has designed, and you may be able to see some glitches between the plastics, but hey, I don't mind. Before we connect the Pimax into the PC, let's have a second look at the lenses. They are really huge and looks a little bit different than any other lenses I've seen before. The lenses have an egg-shaped form, whereas the center area is just like any other Fresnel lens, while the outer edges for the peripheral vision looks like a flat optical extension. The whole lens is covered with the Fresnel rings, but without these we would never be able to achieve that wild field of view, so let's just not hate on the Fresnel lenses yet. And if you worry about possible lens Godrays and glare, please keep watching and I will tell you all about it. Both the 8K and the 5K uses identical lenses with the same amount of field of view, and there is no difference in shape or the optics itself, as far as I know at least. If we compare the lenses to the HTC Vive original Fresnel lenses, you get the picture on how big they really are. Later on in this video, I will also show you how you easily can pop up the lenses in case you need to, and also how the panel looks from inside. So now, when both the Pimax headsets are ready to be connected, let's have a second look at them side by side, just for fun. Both of the headsets are really identical. You really cannot tell the difference between the units from outside, and somehow I wish the logo could have the model name included to make the models easier to distinguish. Or how about adding different colors to the LED chevron maybe? Now let's talk about comfort. I have been wearing the device daily for more than 3 months now, and all I can say is that the Pimax headsets with this strap are very comfortable actually. Not PSVR or Vive Pro comfortable of course, well, as we'll need the outer strap to make a real comparison, but seriously, the included head strap does the job really well. It's very easy to put on and take off, and once you strap it correctly with the Velcro straps and find your best fitting, it really stays on place and won't move much at all, no matter how much you try. The face cushion sits nicely on my face and I don't feel much pressure on my face or my forehead. I would say it's much more comfortable than the HTC Vive was with the original strap. This is mainly because of the fact that the Pimax device feels light. No, really, it's surprisingly lightweight. It may not be perfectly weight balanced by the simple head strap, but it's not front heavy at all and you really don't feel the weight. You would expect it to be heavier because of the size, but let's bring some numbers to the light. I weighted all my headsets and here are the results. My HTC Vive with TPcast and Vive and Chill fans is a big boy, 910 grams. Oh yes, I know there are newer versions which are lighter and I have the first version. Anyway, the Oculus Rift with the TPcast adapter weighs 630 grams and my Samsung Odyssey weighs 650 grams. So how about Pimax? Well, surprisingly enough, for some reason, the 8K is lighter than the 5K Plus. The 8K weighs in on 530 grams, while the 5K Plus is 564 grams. I would say it's really odd. Anyhow, as you can tell, the Pimax headsets are in fact the most lightweight headset I have right now. And no, I know they don't have the audio straps yet, and they don't have the wireless adapters on top, but still, considering the size difference, I'm really impressed about the weight of the 8K and the 5K Plus. And talking about the size, I don't feel that the Pimax headsets are much bigger than my other devices. They are wider, yes, roughly 27 centimeters wide, but the form factor still feels compact in a way, especially if you think about the huge panels inside. But wait a minute, we forgot something here. How about glasses? What if you need to use your glasses while in VR? Well, I don't wear glasses, but luckily I can test the fitting using my cheap Ray-Ban copies from Thailand. And let me just say, I had no problems whatsoever putting the headset on with the glasses on my nose. And to my big surprise, they do fit inside without touching the lenses. I really double checked this and I could not see or feel the fake Ray-Bans touching the lenses. No scratches and no worries. Also, during the Pimax backer meetup in Berlin 2 weeks ago, there were many backers wearing glasses and all of them could use them with the Pimax 8K and 5K Plus. A few of the guys mentioned they could feel some pressure from the glasses on their top of their nose, but Pimax team has clarified that they will give a second pair of face cushions in each Pimax order, also for all the backers of course, and those thicker face pads will make room for more space between lenses and the glasses. And how about scratches overall? It seems to be quite difficult actually to scratch the lenses, and so far during my 3 months of testing the old 8K M1 unit, the lenses looks as good as new still today. Cleaning the lenses is easy, just use a microfiber cloth and gentle move around the lens in circles, just like with any other lens. But enough with the lenses now, I will get back to this topic later on more in deep. And now I know you want me to plug in the 8K or the 5K Plus and start moving on to the fun part, but please have some patience, we will get there. I have one more thing I would like to cover, which I find is very important. There are 2 USB ports on these headsets as mentioned before, and you may wonder if both of them carry data and could be used for more than just powering fans, for example. Well, let's give it a try. First, let's connect the bottom USB-C port with my Samsung smartphone, and we're gonna see if the smartphone gets detected by my computer. Well, yes it does. I get instantly a pop-up on my smartphone where the PC is asking for permission to read the files from my device. I tried copying files and it worked great with really fast transfers. Well, maybe this may not come as a surprise of course, as the bottom USB-C port is supposed to be able to handle accessories such as the Leap Motion hand tracking unit device, which I will actually try out later on in this video. But how about the USB-C port on the top side of this headset? Let's attach the cable to the smartphone again and surprise surprise, it works the same way. This means both of the USB-C connections carries full USB 3 data, so you can connect practically anything to each port, such as external microphone and other cool accessories. Now let's move on to the software installation. The installation wizard guides you through the English setup and everything is quite straightforward. I need to make this clear, once you plug in the Pimax to your DisplayPort and USB as well as the power cable, you will need to install specific software and drivers. Your 8K and 5K Plus won't even work without it. Just like the Windows mixed reality headsets, it needs some software and runtimes to really start off. Luckily, there is one version of the software to install which both handles the Pimax 8K and the 5K, and I think it also handles the Pimax 4K if I remember it correctly, so you never really need to change anything if you switch between your Pimax headsets on the same PC. The Pimax software for the 8K and the 5K Plus is called PiTool, and the installation is basically one simple wizard that guides you through the whole process of installing Pimax drivers, runtimes, services, and the graphical PiTool application, where you can change a lot of important settings such as render image quality, field of view modes, some game specific options, and also basic stuff such as pairing the Vive controllers, setting up room scale, updating firmware, and a lot more. Once you have done all this setup, the PiTool graphical interface does not actually need to be started to be able to use the headset, but the Pimax services in the background are needed to be active. But let's go step by step here and start with the initial setup. Once PiTool is installed, your Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus immediately starts up and you can see a Pimax logo looking inside of the headset. If you have your Lighthouses connected and powered on, you will immediately see them detected in the software, but the Vive controllers are not actually paired and needs to be paired manually with the Pimax 8K or the 5K headset through PiTool. The controller pairing is very simple, just follow the instructions and you will be done in a few seconds. Once you have done that, you won't need to pair the controllers again, neither in Steam VR or any other platform. Anyway, during the first setup, you will need to do a basic room scale setup. It's not a full setup like in Steam VR, but more of a simple one where you are localizing your center point in your game space and calibrating the floor. Once you have done that, you're actually ready to go, starting off Steam VR. In Steam VR, you will now need to make a normal room scale setup, and here is where you can map your gameplay area if you're planning to play room scale games. It's simply just like what you would do with any HTC Vive or Oculus Rift headset, nothing really differs. So basically now we're ready to go. We can just start up Steam VR, launch our favorite VR game, and things will just work as expected. But wait, let's jump back into PiTool for a second. This is the core heart of the Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K Plus headset. Here you have a bunch of settings and I will shortly guide you through them so you really understand the purpose of this software. Under the settings tab, you have two more side tabs called General and HMD. The General tab only consists of a few options not really worth mentioning here, I guess, and the Pimax VR Home is currently not yet ready and only includes an empty, cool looking VR space environment, so I would recommend you to just not run it at all for the moment. Also, it's quite heavy on the GPU for some reason, so yeah, just skip the VR Home for now at least. I assume Pimax will build some kind of graphical VR interface on top of it further on, but we will save that for another video. Let's go into the HMD tab instead. Here you can update your headset firmware with just a click of a button, which is very handy. The next option is to switch the Lighthouse tracking support on and off. This is something I will get back to later on in this video, but as you may know, you do not need the Lighthouses to run the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus, not even in games. I will tell you more about the tracking with 1 and 2 base stations in a moment, and even without the base stations, so don't worry. The next three options in PiTool are basically some fixes for game compatibility, and I'm sure these checked boxes won't be needed later on. Currently it's just to make sure games run as expected, so leave the settings just as they are shown here. Now we're getting to the important settings. We have the field of view option where we can switch between 3 field of view modes: large, normal and small. This is something Pimax have put together to give you the freedom of choosing different field of view, not only for comparison reasons, but also to gain a lot of performance in games in case your computer cannot handle the frame rate in wild field of view. For example, using the normal field of view instead of large, you will gain a big performance boost actually, which I will show you later. The large field of view is the maximum field of view both the headsets can render, which is 170 degrees horizontally, which is around 200 degrees diagonal as being marketed on Kickstarter. The normal field of view is measured to be 150 degrees, and the visual difference is surprisingly small actually, while the performance difference is much bigger when you render less of the game image and less of the headset panels. Lastly, we have a small field of view option which is around 120 degrees, which further increases the performance. Hilariously enough, the small field of view is still bigger than any other VR headset on the market today. I will get more deep into the field of view options, and I will give you more details later in this video, so stay tuned. The last option in this tab is the rendering quality slider. Here is where you can actually change the base resolution of the Pimax renderer that will be used to render everything you play in VR. The default value is 1.0 and you can change it between 0.5 up to 2.0. Any changes you make in the field of view or rendering quality option requires the Steam VR application to be restarted to take effect. This also means that you cannot do this while playing a game. You will need to restart the game if you make any changes. This may sound a little bit weird, but hey, this is how it works now, and as I said, I will explain more about all the functionality and the options later on in this video. Now let's look up again into the main tabs of PiTool. Here we have the My Games tab. Here, every VR supported game you have installed in Steam will automatically be imported into this interface. And you may ask why? Well, I know, for Steam VR games that might sound quite unnecessary as you can start them directly from Steam VR or even your desktop, but I assume Pimax is planning to add individual profiles to each of your game so you can define a specific field of view and resolution to each game for your needs. That's quite smart, I would say. But hey, this is not it. You can also run Oculus home games through this interface. And no, I'm not talking about using Revive with Steam VR. I'm talking about running Oculus home games natively without the Revive hack. Isn't that crazy? Pimax has managed to do the same thing as the guy LibreVR did with the impressive Revive hack software, but the advantage here is that when you start Oculus home games from within PiTool, you will not even use Steam VR renderer. In some way, Pimax has managed to make the Pimax headsets to run Oculus home games natively with its own renderer. Or maybe it's using the native Oculus home renderer, I don't know, I'm still confused about that part, and I'm not sure how it's really made. It seems to be a big company secret how the Pimax renderer actually is working, but anyhow, this is great news I think. You can play native Oculus home games without Revive and Steam VR, and it will give you better performance. Now, here's the downside. Currently, you need to manually import your Oculus home games into the games library in PiTool, but once you import a game, it will just be there to enjoy. Oh, and now you may think, but I want to use Revive. Well, don't worry. Revive works just as normal with the Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K Plus. You start the games through Steam VR just as normal, and they just work, besides the few exceptions. But hey, let's save the game compatibility part for later, where I will fully explain how the VR game works out of the box with this wild field of view and high resolution Pimax 8K and Pimax 5 headsets. I know you're excited about the games and I know you want to know how they work and perform, but please have some patience, we will get there very soon. Now when we know how to start out things and make things running, let's take a break and talk about how the Pimax 8K and the 5K is handling its features, starting with the audio. As we already know, we will need to wait for a little bit longer for the audio strap to arrive, but for now we can connect any audio headset, earphones or earbuds into the 3.5mm audio jack located on the left side of the headset. I can honestly say that the sound quality did not differ at all compared to my audio from my PC on my motherboard or any of my other VR headsets. Great clarity both in games and music with good bass, treble and middle frequencies. No buzzing sound, no audio interference, no delays and no issues at all. Now, how about the microphone on the Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K Plus? The built-in microphone is seen by that little hole you see on the bottom side of the headset on the right side. Both the headsets have identical microphones and identical locations, and the location itself on the microphone is really clever. Let me just give you a short example where I'm testing the microphone. Alright, so we're gonna try out the built-in microphone in the Pimax 8K, which of course is the same in the Pimax 5K Plus. During this test, I'm also gonna use a lavalier microphone, just like I always do in all my videos, and I'm recording the second audio on my cell phone. So we're gonna hear the difference. I'm gonna switch in between them, well, here and there. So we're gonna hear, well, if this microphone is as good as my SmartLav Plus lavalier microphone. Let's go. I'm gonna talk a little bit gibberish here. Let's pop some popcorn and play some Pavlov. Virtual reality porn is awesome, but playing games in VR is even better. Pimax 8K is a wide field of view headset with two 4K panels, and it's just awesome as well. Also, besides talking, I'm gonna try to blow a little bit. First down, then up, then left, then right. So let's do this test now. Down, up, left, and right. I'm also gonna try to breathe a little bit heavier with my nose. And with my mouth. Also, of course, we need to scream a little bit. Hey guys, it's Vive! Whoa, that was so cool! Come on, guys! And we're gonna try to talk a little bit more quiet, because I'm not sure if the microphone can catch up those tones when the volume is a little bit lower. As you can hear, it's almost impossible to make any popping sound while talking. And also, no pop filter is needed. You can breathe heavily. It will not cause any bad noise, nor does blowing with your nose, blowing with your mouth, or even screaming. I'm not an audiophile, to be honest, but being a YouTuber recording my voice quite often, I must say this is actually a very impressive built-in microphone. Okay, moving on to the IPD values and the mechanical IPD adjustment wheel. It's located at the bottom right side of the headset, and it's easy accessible with your right thumb while you are in VR. The IPD range goes between 60.0 and 72.6. Well, sometimes I manage to squeeze out something in between 59.6 and 72.8, but normally the values should be between 60.0 and 72.6. The IPD range moves with 0.2 steps, and it's quite accurate. The lower end of the IPD range may sound a little bit disappointing, as I know many people have the IPD value below 60, but I can tell you that not even one of the 80 backers at the Pimax Berlin meetup 2 weeks ago had any issues with the IPD values. So I guess that if you are around 55 or up, you will be good. I assume that the lower IPD value limit is caused by the fact that it's impossible to move the big lenses more closer to each other, as they are already very close to each other at the minimum value of 60, and moving them even closer would probably just hurt your nose. While you move your IPD wheel, you will also see an on-screen display in the headset. This is something that is only rendered in the headset, and it's not even visible in mirror view on your desktop. To round up this IPD part, I must add that if you have a high IPD value like me, above 65 and something close to 70, it's very important that you set your correct IPD value. Otherwise, you could experience weird distortion and abnormalities in the image. So make sure to check up your IPD number at the local optician, for example, before your Pimax arrives. So how about the 3 buttons we have at the top of the headset? As I said before, we have 3 different buttons. It's a power button and 2 volume buttons. And yes, I'm talking about standby here, because the power button is actually a standby button and not a power button. The headset will not completely turn off unless you pull out the power cable from the cable splitter. This is actually not that great, to be honest, because even when you press the standby button for a second and turn off the headset in standby, the blue LED chevron on the front is still lighten up. I really hope that Pimax can solve this and make the power button to really become a power button, completely turning the headset off. The volume buttons works great, and you can also see an on-screen display inside of the headset while changing the volume. What I don't like about this on-screen display is that it's quite big and right in the center of your vision. It could be a little bit distracting while changing the volume while being in-game. Another thing that might be important to mention is the sweat protection and lens fogging. And yes, you will sweat. Playing intensive games makes you sweat, especially if you never work out or eat too much pizzas as I do lately. But don't worry. During my 3 months of testing with the 8K M1 and 2 weeks of testing with the 8K M2 and 5K Plus, I have managed to soak the face pad completely a couple of times, but still yet today I have not had any issues with water damage and actually no fogging on the lenses whatsoever. Also, talking about sweat damage, Pimax has actually added an extra layer of protection against sweat. Underneath the lenses, or I mean between the lenses and the panels, there is a thin protection glass layer which blocks sweat or water to reach the precious panels, both on the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus. Not only does it block liquids, but it also blocks the dust from coming in. I have opened up the lenses many times, and I will show you how to do that later on in this video, but yet I have not had any problems with dust particles visible in the VR view, as I used to have a lot of dust in my HTC Vive panels after the lens swap. And if you wonder if the whole headset gets hot after long usage, I would say yes and no. It gets quite warm on the front side even after a half an hour of usage, but it's probably because of the panels or maybe the LED lights. But from the lens side, I have never felt any heat coming in on my face, not from the lenses, not from any side of the headset, and not even after using the headset for more than 9 hours straight. Now let's talk about the tracking regarding both the Pimax headsets and also the Vive controllers, which we are using throughout this whole review. The Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K Plus can be used with 1 or 2 lighthouses, but it can also be used, to some degree at least, without any lighthouses at all. Before we go into details, I can assure you that the tracking with 1 or 2 lighthouses on both the 8K and the 5K Plus is flawless. Just as good as the tracking with the HTC Vive, it works identically on the Pimax. As long as you set up your base station correctly, you clear out the room from mirrors and reflective things, you will definitely not have any tracking issues whatsoever. To be honest, most of the complaints about lighthouse tracking issues are basically caused by user error or hardware faults. As long as you don't happen to get a faulty unit, then you won't have any problems. No tracking loss, no lag, no delay or latency, and definitely no drifting. And it doesn't really matter if you're using 1 or 2 base stations. I can tell you that the 8K and the 5K headset has more widely spread sensors across the headset area more than any other VR headset. And why do I know this? Well, because I have done literally hundreds of hours of testing the 8K, not only at home with both 1 and 2 base stations, but also at my work, always using 1 base station only. And the impressive part here is that with 1 base station, you can track the headset 99% of the time in full 360 degrees. That's quite crazy. Here at home, I have also tried using 1 single lighthouse located at the back of me almost 100 degrees, and when playing both sitting down games and standing up games in rules game, I had almost no head tracking loss at all during the complete turns. Maybe it's because the 8K and the 5K are wider than the other headsets and the headset goes beyond your head on the sides, but anyhow, the level of tracking with only 1 base station was definitely not possible when using HTC Vive nor the Oculus Rift with its own sensors. In my opinion, Pimax has made an exceptional job spreading the sensors around the headset, and for me at least, it has resulted in a flawless experience every time, both of the Pimax 8K M2, the final unit, the Pimax 5K Plus, and also when I was using the old 8K M1 testing device. But what if you don't have any lighthouses? I know a lot of backers waiting for the Pimax does not have any Vive bundle at home and therefore no base stations. Personally, I would all recommend you to at least buy 1 base station to be able to do room scale games. But hold on, you can actually play seated VR games that doesn't require room scale and positional tracking, such as racing simulators, flight simulators and such, and it's actually fully playable. This is possible by only using the internal gyro-based tracking available on the Pimax. To test it out, you can actually turn off the Lighthouse tracking system completely in PiTool settings and use the headset without the base stations. It will of course remove the ability to use the Vive controllers as they are controlled by the Lighthouse tracking, and you will not be able to move around in your VR space anymore, but you can still turn around with your head in any direction in full 360 degrees and enjoy your sitting down games, simulators without positional tracking, just like you do with the Oculus Go or the Pimax 4K headset. And while we're talking about the tracking, how about the Vive Trackers? Can we use them together with the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus? The simple answer is yes. First off, you need to understand that the Vive tracking does not send the data of the headset itself. Each Vive tracker has its own wireless USB dongle which receives the tracking data and its position. So this means that this is not even dependent on the headset. While the Pimax 8K and 5K only can pair 2 units with the headset with PiTool, just like Vive and Vive Pro also does with Steam VR, you will need to pair each Vive tracker device to each of its own included wireless dongle connected to your PC with USB. And you do this directly in Steam VR, just like you always have done it with the HTC Vive. Once all the trackers are paired and running, just strap them on and play your favorite VR game with full body tracking support, such as the Island 359 game for example. So let's go a little bit deeper now. How about Brainwarp? Ever since the Pimax 8K and 5K Kickstarter went off, there were some announcements about the unique feature called Brainwarp, which is supposed to be a new reprojection method to double the frame rate, or let's say interpolate every second line of the image, making the 80 Hz to run in 160 and 90 Hz to run in 180 Hz, simply doubling the refresh rate, I would say. Today you're probably asking me, is Brainwarp really implemented now, and can we expect the reprojection method to work similar to the Oculus asynchronous space warp reprojection? Well, yes and no. According to Pimax technicians, Brainwarp is a set of different reprojection methods combined. Some of them are already applied now and working great, such as the head movement reprojection, which is very similar to the asynchronous reprojection we have in Steam VR. And by the way, Pimax is not using the Steam VR asynchronous reprojection, not the into-leave reprojection or any other of the options. So it makes no difference if you switch it on and off those options, the headset will not use them. But some of the Brainwarp features that we're asking for are still not applied, and there is so far no sign of any expected Brainwarp feature similar to the Oculus Space Warp reprojection or the motion reprojection which is available on the Windows Mixed Reality headsets. This is actually no good news for all the flight simulator and racing simulator fans out there, as some of the more demanding VR simulators really depends on space warp or motion reprojection to run smooth. But hey, let's hope Pimax can pull this off sooner or later, and if not, we can always hope that the next generation of NVIDIA RTX graphic cards will increase the performance significantly. I have pre-ordered the RTX 2080 Ti actually, and I will let you know about the performance with the Pimax 8K in my upcoming videos here on SweVire as soon as the GPU arrives. So now I guess you're getting very eager to hear all about the Pimax headsets and how they perform in VR games, right? Well, we're almost there. But first, we have some very important things to cover here regarding both the 8K headset and the 5K Plus headset. That includes the LCD panel functionalities such as black levels, color reproduction, image brightness, screen door effect, image abnormalities such as Godrays, LCD panel utilization, performance, compatibility, and other possible issues. So let's first discuss the LCD display panels that the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus device is using. First, let me explain how the image processing differs on these two. The Pimax 8K has two full-size 4K panels with a built-in upscaler, while the 5K Plus panels have a 1440p resolution. The Pimax 5K Plus is a new version of the former 5K with improved and smaller LCD panels, giving you 9% higher PPI, which is pixel per inches. Also, it has larger panel area utilization and improved color reproduction. While both the 8K and the 5K Plus receives a 1440p resolution image signal from the computer, they have two separate ways to process the image. The difference is that the Pimax 5K Plus panels renders the 1440p resolution natively, while the 8K processes the 1440p image through an internal upscaler and upscales the resolution to 4K for each eye. Theoretically, the Pimax 8K should be able to provide us a significantly sharper image thanks to the 4K panels, while also producing a better screen door effect or less screen door effect. After all, a 4K resolution is 50% larger than a 1440p resolution, and doing some simple math, we can tell that the total pixel count for the 8K is 8.3 million pixels wide, while the 5K Plus has 3.6 million pixels per eye. That also means that the 8K is rendering more than the double amount of pixels per eye. But is the difference really that huge as it seems on paper? And does the upscaling really make the image sharper? Give me a moment and I promise you I will tell you all about it. But first, let's begin with the black levels that these panels can achieve. A lot of people have been worried about the fact that the Pimax are using LCD panel displays for both the 8K and the 5K Plus headset, and the main concerns has been about the poor black levels and the amount of LCD brightness possible. Okay, I can admit, this is by far the biggest downside with the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus compared to any other VR headset with OLED displays. Basically, the difference is that with OLED panels, each pixel is individually illuminated, while all pixels on an LCD panel are illuminated with a LED backlight. The LCD panel can simply not turn off each individual pixel the way OLED panel does, so this means that the whole panel is including every single pixel and it's backlit to a certain degree during the whole time the headset is powered on. This means that the areas that are supposed to be black on an LCD panel won't really be pitch black but more dark gray, and that could indeed be a problem, especially in dark VR games such as Elite Dangerous or Paranormal Activity, and maybe also dark scenes while watching VR movies in VR. The black levels are very hard to measure and capture on camera, so I cannot really give you a straight comparison or a number, but I can at least say that the blacks are better on the 8K and the 5K Plus compared to the Windows Mixed Reality headsets that also uses LCD panels. Well, except for the Odyssey of course, which uses OLED. Pimax is using some kind of custom low persistence LCD panels, which are actually not bad at all in terms of blacks. I also think that the poor black levels being a problem is a completely individual case from person to person. At the first glance, coming from a VR headset such as Vive Pro or Odyssey, you will immediately feel the difference of course. But I'm talking about the first impression here, playing a very dark VR game on the 8K or the 5K. That impression may be a little bit disappointing, but the longer you're using the Pimax, the more your eyes get used and adapted to the maximum black levels. I'm talking about a few hours only. As long as you're not switching between OLED and LCD all the time, you will get used to the LCDs very fast and your eyes will adapt for the dark rays and starting to see them much darker than they actually are. This is not a theory actually, but actually proven science. Personally, I'm not that bothered about the black levels, as most of the games I play never are completely black except for some VR horror games. After 3 months of mainly using the Pimax 8K M1 unit, not only for itself, but also while comparing it with other headsets such as the Vive, Rift and Odyssey, I need to admit that I have totally got used to the LCD panels now. Yes, you may call it becoming blind, but it's just how it works. Also, the black levels differs a lot depending on what you're actually looking at. If you're looking at a dark scene with some light objects making a high contrast scene, then the blacks are actually pretty good. But if you're just staring at a very dark wall or a pitch black wall, then yes, that wall may look a little bit dark gray instead. In high contrast scenes, the blacks look actually really great on the Pimax, as the LCD panels Pimax is using have pretty good contrast levels. So when you're, for example, playing the first tutorial mission in Elite Dangerous with lots of rocks flying around you, you will actually feel the blacks are indeed very dark. And same goes for the cockpit in Elite Dangerous, where you actually have a lot of light around you, the HUD, and also small text between the black parts, creating a big contrast in the image. The cockpit in Elite Dangerous looks simply awesome on the Pimax, but flying around in a pitch black space with only distant planets as white dots will definitely make the space dark red more than black, and there is nothing we can do about it. Well, almost nothing. There is one feature that Pimax actually is currently working on to add very soon, which is adjustable LCD brightness or LCD backlight levels in PiTool. We as the beta testers has requested this and got confirmation from the Pimax team that an LCD brightness option in at least 3 levels will be implemented as soon as possible with upcoming software and firmware updates. Lowering the LCD brightness won't of course make the image pitch black, but it will definitely make the dark scenes look more dark. By the way, I have tried using the night mode in Steam VR, which is an option supposed to darken the image in VR, but for some reason it's not affecting the displays of the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus. All in all, I must be honest here and say that the black levels are fully acceptable on the 8K and the 5K. They could have been better of course, but they're definitely not a deal breaker whatsoever. But looking at the LCD panels from another perspective, how about the maximum LCD brightness levels? Are the LCD panels making the image bright enough in bright games and scenes? Well, brightness is a very important factor to get immersed in VR, if you ask me at least. I would say that the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus have more than enough of brightness, and sometimes I can even feel that it's too bright in very light scenarios. But again, this is a very individual thing, and while people praise the Vive brightness light and the lux values, there are thousands and thousands of Oculus Rift users that are never even noticing or complaining about the low brightness panels that you have on the Oculus Rift. Remember, there is also another factor that we should take in account here. The Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus has significantly wider field of view, which means you're getting light projected in your eyes from a much larger area. So even if the total lux value is lower, your eyes will still feel a higher brightness level just because of the wider perspective the light is projected from. But as this is a review after all, I still want to give you some real life numbers, and I have managed to measure them. Unfortunately, I don't have any lux or light meter here at home, but I have tried a smartphone app called Lux Light Meter and tested it on all my current VR headsets using my Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus smartphone. It uses the light sensor on the smartphone, and I managed to measure the maximum light the headsets can project, and I tested this in a complete white Unity Engine VR environment. The measured values are in lux, and I know they might not be 100% correct to the numbers of a real lux meter, but at least you can see the amount of difference between the headsets, and here are the results. The HTC Vive had 314 lux. The Oculus Rift got 139 lux, Samsung Odyssey had 240 lux, while the Pimax 5K Plus had 145 lux, and the Pimax 8K gives us 150 lux. Well, I'm not surprised about the big difference between Vive and Odyssey compared to Pimax, as they are both brighter when reading the specification on each headset, but what surprised me the most was that the 8K is slightly brighter than the Pimax 5K Plus. Maybe this tiny difference is because of the slightly less screen door effect on the 8K, but the difference was there no matter how many times I tried to measure with the Light Meter app. But to summarize this up, I would say that the brightness levels on the 5K and the 8K are more than enough for me, and without the comparison I would never even think about the maximum brightness being a problem. How about the colors and contrast then? The LCD panels Pimax is using are surprisingly high contrast, both in bright scenes as well as in dark scenes with high contrast. The contrast differs a little between the 8K and the 5K Plus, but I will cover that further on in my head-to-head comparison in this review. The colors are vivid as well, but still not oversaturated. Also, there is a difference here between the 8K and the 5K Plus, but more about that later. While playing colorful games like Lucky's Tale or the fishing game Catch and Release, all I can say is that the colors are beautiful and definitely not worse than any other VR headset I've tried. If not even better actually, especially compared to the Oculus Rift. For the LCD panels, this is quite remarkable, I would say. Now you may wonder, how about the Godrays and glare with the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus, right? I can start off by saying the Fresnel lenses will never be free from Godrays. The rings on the lenses are necessary to make the field of view even possible, and due to the rings there will be a certain amount of Godrays in some extreme high contrast scenarios, looking at white big objects on black backgrounds for example. The 8K and 5K Plus has definitely much less Godrays than both HTC Vive and Oculus Rift, but also slightly less than the Samsung Odyssey. It will never be glare-free as the Samsung Gear VR lenses I put on the HTC Vive in a previous video, but the amount of Godrays or glare the Pimax headsets are producing is within a fully acceptable level, I would say. Remember, the glare test we are watching right now, made in a real virtual test environment, is quite extreme actually, and will always show the worst case scenario. In VR gaming, I hardly see any Godrays at all, and none of the backers at the Berlin meetup did see any Godrays either. Also, while watching movies on the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus, the very slight Godrays in high contrast scenes are definitely not bothering me. So furthermore, let's quickly list a couple of image abnormalities people might be concerned about, and I will give you my honest conclusions here. Do I see any MURA effect on the 8K or the 5K Plus? MURA is, by the way, an inconsistent backlight across the whole panel area, which many people also call clouding. My answer is no, I do not see any background light differences across the full panel image. Next up, is there any backlight bleed from the edges of the LCD panels? Well, no, this is nothing that I have noticed. In every high contrast scene with white text and black background for example, you may see a slight light bleed effect, but I would say it's more of a glare effect and not light bleed. How about COMA then? Is there any COMA effect visible? In the center part of the image, across the at least 100 degrees field of view in the center, there is no noticeable COMA. In the peripheral vision then, very small light objects like stars may have some COMA effect, but the ultra-wide field of view the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus is giving us for the price, I think it's impossible to make good optics in the peripheral vision completely COMA-free, so I really do not see this as a problem. Now, how about distortion and warping? Well, in terms of distortion, then yes, partially in the peripheral vision and especially at the far left and right side, but I will explain that more in depth in a moment, talking about the field of view itself. When we talk about warping, then no, I do not see any warping whatsoever. I think most of it, and maybe all of it, has been fixed with a lot of updates lately. Do I see any image ghosting on the LCD panels then? Well, definitely not. Not in bright scenes nor in dark scenes. The low persistence LCD panels that the Pimax 8K and Pimax 5K are using are making an exceptionally good job here. And do I see any black smear? Well, definitely not. I would say that this problem only exists on OLED panels, which you can see easily when using the Samsung Odyssey for example, but on these Pimax LCD panels there is no black smear whatsoever. And lastly, chromatic aberration. Yes, in the peripheral vision you can spot chromatic aberration around the edges. But again, with this wide field of view, it's impossible to create an optical image free from chromatic aberration at the edges. I can also see some slight chromatic aberration across the edges of the binocular overlap, but it's nothing that distracts me, and you will most likely not see it unless you start looking at some image test charts as the real virtual Steam VR environment. So while we're mentioning distortion, why not start talking about the biggest advantage of the Pimax 8K and 5K Plus VR headsets, the field of view. It's simply fantastic, not only in VR games, but practically in anything you will do on your Pimax. Both of the headsets has identical field of view, claimed to be 200 degrees field of view on the diagonal side, which is approximately 170 degrees on the horizontal plane. This has been achieved by giving the panels an angular alignment and the optics handled by the advanced Fresnel lenses. There has been a lot of confusion about the maximum field of view these headsets can render, as Pimax always stated that the 8K and the 5K Plus are 200 degrees field of view headset. Thing is, if you look at the commercial Pimax trailer, you will see that the field of view is measured at the diagonal line. Well, you can call it false marketing or whatever, but currently there is no official standard on how you estimate field of view in VR, so I guess Pimax just thought it would sound better with 200 degrees. But remember, the Pimax headsets do not have 200 degrees field of view, not horizontal at least. I have estimated the field of view to be around 117 on both the 8K and the 5K Plus using the large field of view, and I used the real virtual Steam VR environment to do so. It's probably possible to achieve maybe 175 degrees field of view if you have a different face shape and more standing out eyes, but for this review we will just keep saying 170 degrees. Also, I'm gonna give you an example on why 200 degrees field of view or even 180 is not even possible with these headsets. Let's have a look at this plastic head, which we are seeing from the top view. We're gonna strap on the Pimax on this head and have a closer look. Now, as we can actually estimate where the eyes are on this head and where they are located inside of the headset, let's just try to physically understand how much field of view these eyes actually can see in real life. You should know that in VR you cannot really fake your real eye field of view. The real life field of view will always be almost identical to your field of view in the headset, unless you use some extremely expensive optics, of course. Otherwise, if you do it wrong, you will feel a very strange effect while moving your head in any position or any direction. So in other words, you can't really see further away than what the position of the panels allows you to in real life. I hope this makes sense. Let's just overlook the lenses for a second and map out where the panels are actually ending on each side. Theoretically, when the panels have these positions inside of the headset, this is the maximum field of view we should be able to see with your eyes, which is clearly below 180 degrees. To be able to do 200 degrees field of view, you would need to make the panels much more angled than they already are. Alternatively, you would need to stretch the panels much further to the side, far beyond our 180 degree mark from your eyes. This is of course not possible, as it would require the headsets to be much wider and the panels much bigger. A second option would be to use additional 2 panels on each side to compensate for the lost 15 degrees field of view of the peripheral vision. So all in all, let's just forget about 200 degrees and remember that both headsets has maximum horizontal field of view of around 170 degrees. Anyhow, going from 100 or 110 degrees field of view with the current generation of VR headsets to the horizontal 170 degree field of view headset might not sound so incredible, but I can tell you that it actually is mind-blowing. The whole feeling and presence and the sense of actually being in the game, in the action and in the experience has now reached a whole new level with the Pimax wide field of view headsets. Whenever you're playing a first-person shooter, a flight simulator, a racing simulator, or just a third-person platformer, you instantly find yourself extremely more immersive and connected with the surrounding. There's probably no correct word that can describe how the field of view increases the presence inside of the VR experience available. Every single VR game that you have played in the past feels like a new game again, to be honest. And you get kind of a different perspective on things around you. Not only the presence is increased, but also the awareness. And all of your senses for things like speed, height and distance gets you completely immersed in a whole different way. Driving a fast car in a racing simulator or flying a fighter jet a few meters from the ground has never felt so fast. Stepping out of the ISS station in space in your astronaut suit, looking at Earth from above in 170 degrees field of view horizontally is just breathtaking, well, at least for me. Detecting enemies with your far left or right peripheral vision while playing military shooters has never been so easy, and even if you can't clearly distinguish objects in your peripherals, you're still immediately noticing them, which gives you a huge advantage in competitive games such as Onward, Pavlov and Stand Out, for example. This is something for everyone here to gain from the wide field of view, I would say. And you want to know something weird? Once you get used to the wide field of view virtual reality, it's simply impossible to go back to the current generation headsets such as Vive, Rift, Odyssey or wherever. If you thought that those 110 degrees was narrow, I can promise you that those 100 degrees will feel like 60 degrees once you have tried the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus. And no, the field of view will of course not cover your entire field of view of real life, because 170 degrees is not the same thing as 220, but still, you're gonna see a small black border on each side, but as soon as you step into the game, you're gonna all forget about it. If you thought that you were looking through a scuba mask with your Vive, believe me, now the scuba mask is gonna feel more like a small keyhole. I know this may sound a little bit too good to be true, but I'm just honest here, guys. There is simply no way I'm going back to anything tinier or more narrow than at least 150 degrees, which is the middle option for the field of view on the Pimax headsets, also called the normal field of view in PiTool. What also is quite remarkable, I would say, is that the difference between 100 and 150 degrees is massive, while the difference between 150 and 170 degrees field of view is rather small. It's only 10 extra degrees on each side, right? Of course it's noticeable, but many times I even find myself playing a VR game on the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus, realizing much later that I accidentally started off the game with normal field of view instead of large field of view. I need to add though that the vertical field of view is not entirely covering your real life field of view in the center even if it's very close to. And the more to the sides you go or look in the peripheral vision, you may notice a slight decrease in vertical field of view. This is really nothing deal breaking, and I would say the vertical field of view overall is really good. Now let's talk about the minor flaws with the wide field of view. I'm not gonna lie here, while using the large field of view, which is the maximum possible on both headsets, you will see some slight distortion and blur in the peripheral vision, and that means at the edges of the screen on left and the right side. First off, you really need to set your IPD correctly. If you don't, you may experience more distortion or even warping at the edges that you're not even supposed to see. But let's assume that you have set your IPD right, then I can tell you that the peripheral vision of the wide field of view is slightly blurred, and even if you don't see any warping, there's still some noticeable distortion at the far left and the right sides and corners, of course. You will most likely notice the blur while looking around with fast movements, and you will be able to see the slight distortion peeking at objects on your left and right side, well, somewhere around 140 degrees field of view and onwards. If you switch to normal field of view, which is 150 degrees, you will hardly see any flaws at all. But in large field of view, which is 170 degrees, then you have those minor problems. I would say it's nothing that actually distracts me anymore, and I can also add that your eyes will get used to it extremely fast. So yes, there are flaws, but it's not bad at all. I would say that the Pimax has done some incredible job during the last 3 months, replacing the lenses, improving the lens distortion profiles and correcting the image for the wide angle field of view. It's actually really a challenge to create a panoramic vision that almost covers your complete field of view by rendering it on two flat panels angled next to each other and correcting it with optical software. I mean, it sounds like a challenge to me. It's quite incredible that it's even possible, I would say, especially in a home consumer grade product. You need to remember that the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus are not really any NASA prototype with thousands of dollars. This is not a $6,000 X-Style, nor the high-end Star VR headset that costs more than a second-hand car. These Pimax headsets are of course aimed for the VR enthusiast, but also for the random VR gamer out there who just want to enjoy VR for a reasonable price. And for that reason alone, I cannot see the minor flaws with the peripheral edge distortion as a problem whatsoever. Things can only improve from now on, and I'm sure Pimax will do improvements. And one day we may have a perfect VR headset with no edge distortion whatsoever, with no blur in the peripheral vision and a completely sharp image across your whole field of view. But the question remains, do we really need it? Well, anyway, binocular overlap. I think some of you may wonder about the size of the binocular overlap of the 8K and the 5K headsets. The binocular overlap is the center area of the VR image that is covered with your both eyes, creating that 3D depth and perception. Everything outside of the binocular overlap is only rendered on one of the panels and can only be seen with one of the eyes, either to the left side or the right side. The real-life human vision binocular overlap is measured to be around 120 degrees or 60 degrees from the center to each side horizontally. The rest is covered by your nose and your face shape, of course. Now, on the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus, I have estimated the binocular overlap to be around 95 to 100 degrees field of view horizontally, or between 45 to 50 degrees from the center on each side. This is slightly lower than the human vision, and because of the wide field of view these headsets provide, you will for the first time ever probably notice the outer edges of the binocular overlap area. If you really look for it and really look close for it, you're gonna see a very diffuse darker line on each side. Don't take me wrong, this is definitely nothing distracting and nothing you will see in games, but if you really want to see it, then yes, you will find it. The outer edges of binocular overlap are of course created by the inner edges of each lens, and while the optics of the Pimax 8K and 5Ks are great, but they're far from perfect, so you may also see some slight distortion and chromatic aberration around the outer edges of the binocular overlap. Pimax is still in the progress to fix this with improved lens profile, and I'm sure they're gonna get there one day. I know, this sounds extremely geeky, and I think most of you will never even see or bother about this all, but I'm sure there are a real high-tech VR enthusiasts out there and engineers out there who have asked me about this information, so I hope I answered your questions. Now let's talk about sweet spot instead. How is the sweet spot on the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus? Well, to start off, it's identical on the both units. The sweet spot is actually the center area of your vision in VR, where everything is clear and fully sharp, fully readable text, without any blur, without any distortion, and without any chromatic aberration or any other optical flaws. So does the Pimax 8K or 5K Plus give you a large sweet spot? Oh yes, it does, definitely. And I would say that the sweet spot is definitely larger than any other existing VR headset on the market has right now. As long as you dial in your personal IPD value correctly and align your Pimax headset correctly on your head, you will most likely have a near perfect sweet spot, which is at least as big as your binocular overlap area, around 100 degrees or 50 degrees from center to each side. In fact, beyond the edges of the binocular overlap area, you have another 20 or 30 degrees on each side that is also very sharp with fully readable text. But the outer line that I just mentioned before of the binocular overlap endings on each side creates a little slight edge in between with some slight distortion and also chromatic aberration. So that's why I prefer to say that the real sweet spot is within the binocular overlap and not beyond it. Even if the image is fully sharp, or well, almost fully sharp outside until maybe 140 degrees field of view. All in all, the sweet spot is really impressive, and it goes almost all the way in the vertical field of view as well. I wish I could give you an example on how it looks, but the sweet spot is impossible to capture on camera. Let's talk about the refresh rate. The panel refresh rate is something widely discussed online regarding the Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K headsets because it differs. And we're gonna make it official now. The panels on the 5K Plus are running in 90 Hz or 90 frames per second, of course, while the 8K panels runs in 80 Hz. Yes, 80, not 82, not 85, it's 80. And this means two things. The games cannot run higher than in 80 frames per second on the Pimax 8K, and it also means that the games does not need to run higher than the 80 frames per second on the Pimax 8K to really run fully smooth. Using the 5K Plus, the graphic cards needs to render 90 frames per second to get the full smoothness in VR games. And the butter smooth experience without any necessary projection is what we all really want, right? So your first reaction now would most likely be that the Pimax 8K with the 80 Hz panels is less GPU demanding than the Pimax 5K Plus with 90 Hz panels with the same settings and the same image quality in game, right? Well, yes and no, it's really not that simple, and I will explain this more in depth in a moment once we start to talk about the general performance. But there is something else here about 80 Hz refresh rate. I think this is a fact that many people really assume that the 80 Hz or frames per second is not enough to get a smooth VR gameplay. Some people actually believe that 80 Hz could also lead to nausea, dizziness, motion sickness or any other human-related issues, as well as flickering on the eyes, right? Well, let me tell you, all these assumptions are incorrect. First, I see no difference whatsoever between 80 and 90 Hz while switching between my Pimax 5K Plus and the Pimax 8K. In both cases, as long as the frame rate runs as its maximum, you will experience a silky smooth image no matter if you play in 80 or 90 Hz. I definitely do not feel any nausea, no motion sickness or whatsoever because of the lower frame rate. I do not see any lag, no flicker or simply no noticeable difference whatsoever. 80 frames per second may be 10 lower than 90, but believe me when I say it, your eyes won't see it. Unless you have some individual issues with your vision or extremely sensitive eyes. And as for VR game compatibility, which I will cover in a moment, simply all VR games can run butter smooth VR in 80 frames per second, just like with 90 frames per second. I have not seen any game being bound or limited to 90 frames per second, so don't worry about that. Now, let's move on and we're going to start to talk about screen door effect, resolution and image clarity, and if it has been improved compared to the other VR headsets. First of all, you need to understand what screen door effect really means. It's not only about the pixel amount you have on each panel and the size of the panels, but it's mainly about the space between each pixel. The whole pixel pattern alignment or the pixel matrix and the gap between each row and column of pixels will give you either less or more screen door effect. As you already know, the first generation of VR headsets such as the HTC Vive and Oculus Rift had quite low resolution with rather big panels, big pixels and a significant space between pixels, which really made the screen door effect visible even in gaming. First off, the HTC Vive, the Vive Pro, Samsung Odyssey and also Oculus Rift are all using OLED panels which has pentile pixel matrix, while the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus LCD panels are using RGB pixel matrix. The pentile panels has a different subpixel rendering pattern compared to RGB, where the pentile uses less subpixels to render each pixel on the screen. Subpixels are, by the way, the three main colors, red, green and blue, that almost every panel on the market used to create any possible color available within the RGB spectra to create a lighten up pixel. I won't go too deep into this topic, of course, as I don't think it's necessary for this review, but the fact is that the RGB pixel matrix on the Pimax LCD panels are actually giving a better image, especially while peeking at small text and very fine details either on close distance or far distance. So already here we have the first big advantage with the Pimax 8K and 5K Plus being full RGB LCD panels. Now we're gonna take a look at a lot of through the lens photos I've taken with my Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus mobile or smartphone. And guys, all of these through the lens photos will be available for my Patreons. I'm gonna upload them on Monday, the day after the review is up. So join my Patreon if you would like to get those photos. Thank you so much. Let's continue now. But there is more to cover here. We also need to take the panel resolution, panel size and panel utilization into consideration. The Pimax 8K has two full-size 4K resolution panels which are 3840 x 2160 pixels per panel, making the total amount of pixels above 8 million pixels per eye. The render image signal that is sent to the headset is actually not native 4K but full 1440p resolution, well, mainly because of today's bandwidth limits with the DisplayPort cable, and later the image is upscaled with the internal upscale up to 4K. But that doesn't really affect the screen door effect, as the final image is still presented on the 4K panels, of course. It does not add any latency or delay, but what the scaler adds to the image is slight blur, and I will get into that in a moment. The Pimax 5K on the other hand uses two 1440p panels with the total resolution of 2560 x 1440 per eye, and the total amount of pixels is almost 3.7 million per eye. The final rendered image signal is sent rather natively and presented on the pixels without any internal upscaling. So on paper, it's 8 million pixels versus 3.7, right? It sounds like a huge difference. Well, in fact, it's not. The 8K and the 5K Plus uses different type of pixel matrix, despite both being RGB LCD panels. The 5K Plus has a very straight pixel pattern, with noticeably straight vertical and horizontal lines across the whole panel, which of course is the empty space between the pixels in the whole pattern. You will not see it much, but if you look for it, the screen door effect is there. In games you will most likely not see it, but if you're looking up in the bright sky or just on a white wall, you will definitely notice the pixel pattern and the space in between the pixels. The Pimax 8K on the other hand uses to me a very strange pixel pattern, I would say, which is not vertically or horizontally straight. The pattern and the screen door effect feels more diagonal, similar to the OLED displays and the pentile pixel matrix, but of course more details thanks to the RGB arrangement and more subpixels used. And there is just something different about the whole pixel pattern or pixel matrix on the 8K that makes the pixels harder to distinguish from each other, even if they are still there. This also makes through the lens photos more difficult to create what I initially expected. Also, this makes the comparison between the 8K and the 5K Plus screen door effect quite difficult and not so obvious as you would probably imagine. I can clearly see that we have a slightly less space between each pixel on the 8K, making the screen door effect noticeably less visible and harder to detect compared to the 5K, but I would personally say that the difference is not that huge as I was expecting it to be. Don't take me wrong here, the 8K definitely uses 4K panels and the pixels looks without a doubt smaller on the 8K, but the tiny space between each pixel and line is still visible, making the screen door effect still noticeable on the 8K, well, if you really look for it, despite using 4K panels. So do not expect the screen door effect to be completely gone on either the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus. You will see it if you really look for it on both the 8K and the 5K Plus, and in bright scenes it is far more apparent than in darker scenes, of course. And you cannot expect the image to be crystal clear either. I think we need something like 16K panels per eye to really get there, to get that real life vision. But how about if we compare the screen door effect with other VR headsets? If you ask me, and also ask other backers that visited the Berlin backer meetup 2 weeks ago, we can all agree that the screen door effect on the 8K and 5K Plus was indeed better compared to the Vive Pro, Samsung Odyssey or any other Windows mixed reality headset, and well, of course, better than the Vive and Rift. So if you ask me if there is a significant difference between Pimax headsets and the others, the answer is yes, without any doubts. The higher panel resolution and less screen door effect on both 5K and the 8K is huge compared to the Rift and Vive, and also better than the Vive Pro and Odyssey. I would say this is actually a game changer in terms of competitive VR gaming, and it could make you a winner just because of the better vision at far distance and more details seen at distance compared to the other headset if you're using the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus. Maybe you won't see much of a difference while playing Paranormal Activity and other dark VR games, but in bright scenes and simulators it really is a noticeable improvement over any existing VR headset on the market today. Period. I need to add though that I have never tried the Pimax 4K headset, but according to a few of the other Pimax 8K M1 beta testers from Spain, for example, which also had the Pimax 4K headset and did the comparison between the 4K and the 8K M1, then it shows that the Pimax 4K is still more sharp and has less screen door effect. Well, personally I will leave that unsaid as for now, as I cannot confirm this by myself. But I have a few more things to cover here. As I already said, the difference in pixel matrix between the Pimax headsets makes them a little bit different from each other, and both of the headsets has both its strengths and also its weaknesses. The higher 4K panel resolution on the 8K definitely has an advantage here over the 1440p panels, especially when you're trying to read small text in games like Elite Dangerous, for example, or looking at objects at far distance in racing simulators, in flight simulators, and especially in military simulators or shooters such as Onward, when you really want to be able to distinguish your opponents from miles away. Also, while trying to aim at targets in digital combat simulator or EL2 Sturmovik, the resolution and screen door effect have a huge role here. And here is where the 8K takes the edge over the 5K Plus. I don't really think the side-to-side comparisons or through the lens photos can really make the headsets justice here, but in the real world I can promise you that the 8K definitely is more high resolution. I'm not saying the 5K Plus is bad, it's really not. It has still less screen door effect than Vive Pro with better clarity, but the fine details, especially on distance, are more distinguishable on the 8K. But here comes the twist now. I mentioned image clarity a moment ago, and with clarity I'm talking about the level of as clean as possible and as polished as possible image without aliasing or noise. And here is where the 5K Plus shines and takes the edge. The 5K Plus image processing differs from the 8K, and the 5K Plus is bypassing the native resolution to the panels without any internal upscaler, of course. While the resolution is lower, this still improves the overall clarity compared to the 8K. The image just looks more native. The upscaler chip built into the 8K will never be able to do the upscaling as sharp and crisp as the native signal, even if the native signal has a lower resolution. Another interesting thing that you really need to know about, which I will talk a little bit more about further on as well, is that the Pimax 8K will really not show its full potential until you really push much higher resolution to the headset compared to the 5K Plus. Yes, it sounds wrong, as both headsets are receiving a 1440p rendered image. But wait, the Pimax technicians has already made a few statements about this. The whole rendering pipeline may be a little bit of a mystery here, because Pimax do not really reveal it completely, but I will give you my own theory. To be able to use the potential of the 4K panels on the 8K headset together with the upscaler, you really need to render the game in a much higher resolution than the 1440p. Then you downsample the image to 1440p resolution, send the signal over to the headset, and then the upscale does the job and upscale it to 4K panels. Doing it this way, you will see noticeably less aliasing and jagged edges on the 8K. So if you are rendering a game in native 1440p resolution and sending it to each headset without any more super sampling or downsampling, then the image will look noticeably better on the 5K Plus compared to the 8K. This is very obvious, especially in Steam VR dashboard, but also while looking in menus in games, heads-up displays in games, and also while reading both small and large text, which I will show you in a moment. It's really difficult to show you the difference side by side through the lenses and through the lens photos, but the overall image will be more detailed on the 8K, but the 5K Plus will have better clarity. I know it all sounds very confusing, but it's just my conclusion. So now you wonder which one really is better for VR gaming in terms of screen door effect, resolution and clarity. Is it the 8K or the 5K Plus? Well, that's impossible to tell. It all depends on what game you're playing and also how much you can push the resolution of the games. For racing simulators and flight simulators, including space games like Elite Dangerous, and if you are having a fast computer enough to handle a little bit high resolution in the rendered image, I would say that the 8K has a slight advantage with lower screen door effect and more distinguishable object and more readable text. And while you will lose a little bit of the native image clarity compared to the 5K, I still think that less screen door effect and more resolution is more important in those simulators, and most hardcore VR simulator fans will most likely appreciate the 8K a little bit more than the 5K Plus. And a lot of backers actually did so during the Pimax meetup in Berlin. The 8K was the simmer's choice. For casual gaming though, this is another story. Let's say Skyrim VR, budget cuts, Hellblade, Lucky's Tale, or even Job Simulator. The majority of all casual VR games, especially those who are made with Unity engine, are quite simple without any crazy details most of the time, and without any minimalistic text or extreme distances in sight. And here I think that the 5K Plus will bring more clarity and more popping image and clean image that the average VR user will prefer. So the choice between 5K Plus and 8K regarding the screen resolution, the screen door effect, the clarity is all up to you and what you prefer to play in virtual reality. I cannot make that decision for you. But wait, there is more to discuss here while we're at it. How about panel utilization? A lot of people have been asking questions how the Pimax 5K Plus and especially the 8K is rendering the image into the panels and how much of the panel actually is used for the rendered image. So well, I decided to have a closer look and give you some proof. Let's first open up the Pimax 5K and check out the large field of view and how it looks in the left eye. To do this, we need to pop out one of the lenses from the headset, and it's much easier than you would imagine. Do not try to use any sharp tools, it's really not necessary. Just use any suction cup which is smaller than the lens itself, put it on, press it against the lens and remove the air in between, and just use enough of force to carefully lift the lens up. And don't worry about the dust particles coming in. The protective glass between the lens and the panel, which I mentioned earlier, will make sure no dust reaches the panel. Anyway, now we have a look at the large field of view image rendered on the Pimax 8K, then we're going to look at the normal field of view, and then lastly, small field of view. As you can see, on the vertical field, the panel is rendered from the edge to edge, well, almost at least. On the right inner side of the left panel, there is an approximately 3 to 5% of the panel not being utilized, and on the far left side, the amount may be between 10 and 50% maximum. Then we of course also have some rounded corners of the image, which is due to the nature of how the image is rendered, but also due to the distortion correction profiles that are used to correct the image proportions and perspective in all angles. Switching to the normal field of view, the only thing that decreases is the left side utilization, of course, as we're limiting the visible field of view. Now we're probably skipping more than 30% of the left side for the rendering, and same goes for the small field of view. Again, we're limiting the field of view even further on the left side, and now the non-utilized area is somewhere around 40, maybe 45%. Doing the same on the Pimax 5K Plus, we can see that the panel utilization is basically identical for each field of view, so no difference whatsoever between the 5K Plus and the 8K. But now when we know that we are rendering almost the entire panel, does this mean that we are actually seeing the whole rendered image in VR? Well, actually not. I cannot give you the exact numbers on how much percentage of the rendered image you will never see in VR because of the nature of the lenses and the distortion profiles, but at least I can say we're wasting totally at least 20% of the vertical field of view and maybe also 20% in the horizontal field of view of the rendered image on the panel. The numbers are only my theoretical estimations, and I will do more in-depth videos about this later for sure, but now I just need to let you know that the screen door effect could theoretically improve if Pimax improves the rendering algorithm with updates and corrects the lens distortion profile to take advantage of more of the utilized panel area that actually is rendered. So for this time, I think we have covered the topic, and remember, I will make more follow-up videos regarding the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus, including more resolution testing, comparisons and conclusions. So make sure to subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for more geeky VR content. So let's move on. Now when we know how the field of view and resolution is handled, how about using the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus as a media player watching movies in VR? Both normal movies, but also 180 degrees movies and 360 degrees movies, also in 3D. Okay, let's start off with the refresh rate, which is quite an important factor for watching movies and films in VR. As you already know, we use 80 Hz on the 8K and 90 Hz on the 5K Plus, and none of these refresh rates are optimal for 24p, 30p or 60 progressive frames per second content. Luckily, me together with the other Pimax beta testers has requested a 60 Hz mode to be added in PiTool, and we have been informed that the 60 Hz mode is coming with software updates very soon. It sounds like the custom refresh rates are fully possible on both the 5K Plus and the 8K, so maybe we can also expect more options such as a 72 Hz mode for butter smooth film content. But apart from the refresh rate, I need to tell you this, that using Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus is the first time I ever feel that I can actually enjoy watching VR movies in VR. The increased panel resolution on both headsets and especially the lower screen door effect makes the image so much sharper and satisfying to look at. But I must admit that the Pimax 8K with less screen door effect is slightly better for watching movies despite lack of the overall clarity that we get with the 5K Plus. But I'm not saying the 5K Plus is much worse, not at all. I would say the 5K Plus works perfectly fine for movies. You may see slight more screen door effect if you really look for it, but it's never gonna be distracting, and most of the time you will never notice the pixel pattern unless you really look at bright scenes like a light blue sky. Either way, it's definitely a huge step from the Vive, Rift and even the Samsung Odyssey, I would say. The Pimax headset also produces a very nice and saturated color and contrast, especially considering its LCD panels. And watching colorful 4K content is really stunning. Browsing YouTube is not a problem either, both using Big Screen Beta or the YouTube application itself in SteamVR, and occasionally you could see some glare or God rays while watching high contrast videos and high contrast scenes, but it's definitely less noticeable than with any of my other VR headsets. The heavily increased field of view actually adds something extra to the movie watching as well. Not only can you watch a wider cinema screen without moving your head, but you get also a much bigger sweet spot like mentioned before, most likely covering your whole movie screen. The wide field of view does not mean that you're gonna watch a flat movie in 170 degrees, because that would be quite uncomfortable, but you can easily stretch the image to at least 120 degrees field of view and watch it by only moving your eyes. Side by side and over and under 3D movies works great, but I have unfortunately not yet tried the real 3D Blu-ray movies and how they perform with these headsets. I assume as long as we use a proper software to display those 3D Blu-rays, such as the Power DVD with VR support, I think it should work just fine. About stereoscopic and non-stereoscopic 360 and 180 degree movies, well, yes, it works great. I tried different clips in 3D stereoscopic view, and yes, I even tried some stereoscopic 180 degree VR porn movies just for science. And all I can say is that hey, it looks awesome, especially with the simple VR player, which has a great image quality and great enhancements. And I couldn't find any issues except for one. When watching 180 degree videos or clips on a 170 degree field of view headset, you don't have much headroom to move your head anymore. And if you move your head, you're gonna see that the edges of your view will start to see the borders of the 180 degree movie, which kind of breaks the immersion. But is it a huge problem? Probably not. All in all, videos, movies, 180 and 360 degree content works really above my expectations using the Pimax headsets. And how about desktop work with either the 8K or the 5K Plus? Well, here's the thing. I think this is an individual thing, and a lot of people might find the desktop image to be enough for casual desktop work in applications such as Virtual Desktop, Big Screen Beta, or just in SteamVR desktop mode. Personally, I would say we're not there yet. Not with the 5K Plus and not even with the 8K. The input resolution is simply not good enough, not natively and definitely not upscaled to the 4K panels as the Pimax 8K is doing. Icons and windows looks okay, but small text is still very hard to read unless you move close to the desktop. Without going too deep into this topic, I can say that yes, you probably can use the Pimax for desktop work because it is better than using your other existing VR headsets, mainly because of the RGB pixel matrix pattern, giving slightly more clarity in text. And VR game developers might get a huge advantage here by being able to see more clarity while working in VR. But still, in my opinion, it's definitely not like sitting in front of a huge 4K monitor, not a 1440p monitor or even a 1080p monitor. We're quite far away from that yet, and I'm not really sure if a native 4K resolution might even be enough for this task. Let's take a break here for a moment and talk about something completely different now. As you probably know, Pimax will soon also start to ship the custom Pimax supported Leap Motion hand tracking units to all Kickstarter backers who pledged for it during the campaign. I don't think that the Leap Motion will be included in the first batches when the shipment starts, and I still think it's a little bit early to talk about this unit yet, but I still need to show you this device in action for a few seconds without going too much into details. The Leap Motion hand tracking unit for Pimax is simply outstanding and works above expectations. It really looks cool, it matches the headset perfectly, it's easy detachable with 2 screws only, and you connect it with the button USB-C port on either the Pimax 5K or the 8K. The hand and finger tracking is surprisingly accurate, reading your fingers really well in most situations. The field of view of the hand tracking unit is greatly improved from the standard Leap Motion that is already out on the market, and even if it doesn't have the same wide field of view angle as the headset itself, it's still more than enough. Now let's hope this hand tracking device finally gets some more support in VR games, and I will do more testing videos of this Leap Motion hand tracking unit very soon on my channel, including some cool stuff like hand tracking in flight simulators and much more. But until then, let's get back on topic and discuss the Pimax headset again. I think it's time to start to talk about the overall performance in both Pimax headsets. I will go more into detail in the specific selected VR games and simulators later on in this video, but let's first cover some of the important information you need to know. As I said earlier, no matter what VR games you play and whatever content you enjoy in VR, when using the Pimax 8K you will need to push a higher resolution to the panels to be rendered than you will need to with the 5K Plus. And more resolution needs of course more GPU raw power, more CUDA cores, more bandwidth, faster GPU memory and higher clock frequencies. To really enjoy Pimax headsets with all the possible VR games, including the most popular releases and especially the super demanding VR simulators, you will need to use one of the best Nvidia or AMD graphic cards on the market. That's just a fact. You cannot expect a GTX 1070 to play smooth on the Pimax 8K or nor the Pimax 5K, at least not in the majority of the titles. The thing is that you cannot really cheap out on the PC parts when trying to power the most advanced VR headsets on the market with the highest render resolution possible per eye compared to any other VR headsets. Remember, Vive Pro and Odyssey might also use 1440p panels, sending a 1440p signal, but in reality these panels are 1440 times 1600 per eye, and the game rendering is also made in around 1440 times 1600 plus some mandatory overhead for the distortion correction. But just because your game's playing fine on the Vive Pro does not necessarily mean it will run fine on the Pimax 5K Plus and especially not on the Pimax 8K. Let me explain. By doing some simple math, the Vive Pro and Samsung Odyssey panel rendered resolution per eye is 1440 times 1600, which gives us roughly 2.3 million pixels rendered per eye. The 5K Plus, on the other hand, uses two full-size 1440p panels with the resolution of 2560 times 1440 pixels, and the rendered resolution should be at least same or higher, which gives us a total of above 3.6 million pixels per eye. That's actually beyond 50% more pixels rendered per eye on the 5K Plus compared to the Vive Pro and the Odyssey, of course. And the same goes for the 8K, which receives the same image signal. But wait a minute, we just said that the 8K needs more rendered pixels in-game to really give you the perceived image quality compared to the 5K, right? That's correct. I would personally say that the Pimax 8K needs another 50% higher resolution compared to the 5K Plus to really shine, show its potential, and also outperform the Pimax 5K Plus in both sharpness and overall perceived image quality. So what does this mean really? Well, you will not only need to render 1440p resolution in games with 3.6 million pixels per eye, but much more than that. And how much is 50% more resolution than full-size 1440p panel resolution? Well, that's native 4K resolution. Now we have some food for thoughts, I guess. And you may wonder how much GPU is really needed to really be able to render a 4K sized image per eye and per panel, and also in 80 frames per second. Well, sometimes the GTX 1080 Ti is enough, but sometimes you need much more than that. But a 1070 will definitely not be enough, and most of the time I think the GTX 1080 will struggle. Unfortunately, I don't know much about the AMD GPUs today, so I will only talk about the Nvidia graphic cards this time. While I'm mostly basing my tests and results in this entire video by using the best graphic card on the market, the Nvidia GTX 1080 Ti, I must add that I will reveal much more testing results with the GTX 1070 on my VR ready laptop in my upcoming videos covering the Pimax headsets. Luckily, the 8K only needs 80 frames per second and the panels are running in 80 Hz as mentioned earlier, so we need to render 10 less frames per second to get a perfectly smooth VR experience without reprojection. But still, rendering two full 4K images in 80 frames per second is really not easy for today's graphic cards lineup, at least until the Nvidia RTX 2080 and 2080 Ti releases later this month. You can, of course, lower the resolution in PiTool and gain some performance, but do you really want that? I think none of us wants to play with our new Pimaxes in lower resolution than recommended and looking at jagged edges in games and slightly blurred image overall. It just doesn't take the advantage of the 8K potential and doesn't make it any justice. Am I wrong here? Now, there is still hope actually. SteamVR render scale slider in SteamVR settings will partially help you with the performance by downsampling the rendered image from PiTool with very little or almost no noticeable image quality decrease, at least to a certain degree, I guess. And I will give you a lot of examples in tested VR games for this review, just give me a moment. But first I wanted to teach you something about the PiTool rendering and the SteamVR rendering and how they both are working together. Whenever you're using a Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus, you really need to understand how PiTool is working, how the rendering quality slider is working together with the field of view option, and also how PiTool is connected and related to SteamVR and the built-in SteamVR render resolution scale or super sampling. So first off, we have a default value of a large here. I'm actually doing this test with the Pimax 8K. As you can see here, it's 80 Hz instead of 90 Hz on the Pimax 5K Plus. So if we have the render quality on 1.0, which is the default, we're gonna have a native resolution in SteamVR of this. This is quite a lot. This is way above 4K resolution. So what we are doing in SteamVR, either automatically by unticking the manual override or manually, we're actually changing the resolution scale down to a lower value to get a more acceptable resolution and of course much better frame rate, and still maintain the quality. Because here's the secret: whenever you have the SteamVR slider on 100% or on 40%, you won't see much of a difference, to be honest. You can even go down to maybe 32 and it's still gonna look almost identical to 100%. The problem starts once you go below 30%, then you're gonna see a lot of jagged edges, the image is gonna be more blocky and more decreased. This is, well, my conclusion after 3 months of testing the Pimax 8K. So anyway, this is actually what I'm using most of the time with the Pimax 5K Plus. I'm using the large field of view in games to get the best immersion. I'm using the standard PiTool rendering quality of 1.0 and I'm using 50% in SteamVR. Well, you're gonna see that throughout the video where I'm doing some game tests later on. As you can see, SteamVR is recommending me to use 48%, which is very close, but I'm gonna leave it at 50%. So now let's see what happens if we change this to normal field of view, which I actually think is more than enough. It only gives you 10 degrees less field of view on each side while you're playing games. So there's not much of a visual difference, but it's still a huge bump in performance. And I'm gonna restart SteamVR so you see the difference. And now when SteamVR is restarted, the changes takes effect here, and you can suddenly see that SteamVR is now recommending us to use 90% of SteamVR resolution scale for the well-balanced performance. So you can either leave it here, or you can actually still go down to maybe 60% and gain a lot more performance by just going to normal field of view instead of large. You're losing 10 degrees on each side, but you probably gaining tens of frames per second in most VR games. I'm gonna give you one more example to really make you understand what the rendering quality slider is about, because we can change this between 0.5 up to 2.0. The default value is 1, but let's put it on 1.5, which I'm actually doing in a few game tests during this review. As I said before, we need to restart SteamVR. And once SteamVR is restarted again, you're gonna see that the rendering quality of 1.5 with normal field of view gives us a recommended SteamVR resolution rendering scale of 40%. Now we're up to 60%, but if we untick the manual override and tick it again, it's gonna be at the recommended NVIDIA setting. You can also untick this and never touch it at all, but remember, once you start to go below 30 or something, then you're gonna see a huge decrease in image quality, and you really don't want that. So that's why I'm mostly using the manual override, and I'm using somewhere in between 40 and up to 100% in render resolution scale, depending on what rendering quality settings I'm using in PiTool. So well, this is actually an option where you can play most Pimax 8K games and they're gonna look sharp, because here's the thing, Pimax 8K needs a little bit higher resolution or render quality than Pimax 5K Plus to really get that clarity and that sharpness, and that is because of the built-in scaler. So this option with the Pimax 8K is gonna be equivalent or almost the same in terms of sharpness and clarity as this option on the Pimax 5K. So this is the reason why people are telling you that the Pimax 5K is less demanding and you can have a lower graphic card than the GTX 1080 Ti, for example. One more thing, I'm gonna switch back to large field of view and I'm gonna put this slider to rendering quality 1.5 again and restart SteamVR. As you can see, the resolution in SteamVR has actually been bumped up quite a lot if we are using a rendering quality of 1.5. And yes, today's graphic cards like the GTX 1080 Ti is really not enough to render this kind of image or quality with the Pimax 8K right now. Of course, you could go maybe down to 30 and still get an acceptable image, but still, I mean, this is a resolution of practically 4K per eye that you are rendering. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that PiTool is sending the image, the rendered image, to SteamVR, and then you're deciding how you're gonna upscale it or downscale it, well, to get better performance or to get better image quality. And I'm going to tell you much more about all the relations, all the different options you can gain, and how you actually can customize this for, well, different types of games, and in a later video, probably later this week or the week after. So there we have it, and one more time, according to my personal testings made the last months, basically using PiTool at 1.0 with SteamVR super sampling at 50% on the Pimax 5K Plus will look almost identical as using PiTool 1.5 instead with SteamVR super sampling 50% using the Pimax 8K, at least in terms of image sharpness, aliasing and minimal blur. Remember, no matter what settings you use, the overall image clarity will always be slightly better on the 5K Plus thanks to the native panels, but the screen door effect and amount of details you will see will always be better on the 8K thanks to the high resolution of the panels and of course the screen door effect. Does it make any sense? Well, I hope so at least. Hopefully Pimax will keep on improving the rendering performance as they have done so far, because I can tell you that during the last 3 months of beta testing the Pimax 8K M1 unit, the performance has more than doubled thanks to the Pimax technicians constantly changing the rendering algorithm. And now when you finally understand the connection between PiTool rendering and SteamVR rendering, then you might also understand that the whole performance issue is a matter of personal taste, personal requirements of what you think is good image quality enough for you, and also it's a matter of what games you play. And that leads us to the next topic, and that is game compatibility. I'm sure you're now wondering which VR games do work on the Pimax headsets and which doesn't. Let me give you a few facts here, and also remember that all I'm saying is based on my own results from own extensive testing of the Pimax 8K M1 during 3 months, which includes more than 400 games and VR titles. Well, approximately 97% of all existing SteamVR games and games with added VR support works out of the box on both Pimax headsets. By work, I mean the games are starting up and are fully playable without any tweaking, without any customizations, no possible issues, with fully working wide field of view and correct refresh rate both 80 and 90 frames per second. I'm not talking about performance here, but only functionality. All the major and favorite games such as Skyrim, Fallout 4, Budget Cuts, Arizona Sunshine, Superhot, Pavlov, Onward, and most of the others work just perfectly. Also, many other games with added VR support such as Payday 2 and The Force VR and Hellblade works flawlessly. There are very few exceptions here where the game engine has a specific problem getting the correct headset resolution, which leads the game to render a very low resolution in the Pimax headset. There are workarounds, but they're not optimal yet, and these games affected are mainly Doom VFR, Vanishing of Eden Carter, Robinson the Journey, and a couple of other minor titles. Hopefully this will be solved quickly once the developers can work together with Pimax to solve these issues. Also, LA Noire has a worldscape problem, but it's fully playable except that everything looks a little bit undersized. Next fact is that at least 90% of all Oculus home games runs just as described above, either with using Revive Hack or the PiTool launcher that I just showed you earlier. Many Oculus home games works through Revive and PiTool as well, while some games only starts through one or the other. All the major Oculus exclusives such as Lone Echo, Echo VR, Farlands, Lucky's Tale, Arctica 1, From Other Suns, Robo Recall, Brass Tactics, and many others were working flawlessly. There are a few Oculus titles that still need some proper support and may crash upon startup. One example is the game Pro Fishing Challenge. A few games could also have controller pairing issues, but it's not commonly seen, and at least not in the exclusive titles. Moving on, all the major flight simulators, racing simulators, space simulators, and underwater simulators works just as described above and has correct field of view out of the box. That includes Digital Combat Simulator, IL-2 Sturmovik, X-Plane 11, Elite Dangerous, Aerofly FS2, Project Cars 1 and 2, Assetto Corsa, R-Factor 2, RaceRoom, iRacing, Dirt Rally, City Car Driving, and you name it. There's so many titles and I have not found any issues in any of them. VR add-ons also, such as the Fly Inside for the MS Flight Simulator X for example, works perfectly. I cannot find any simulator that does not work, to be honest, and the performance may be lacking in some of them, but that's another story. I must add though that you can find a few minor bugs in some of these VR simulators, but definitely this is nothing deal-breaking and it's not related to the wide field of view. Moving on, we have the custom VR modded games included both Steam versions and also standalone games. All of them works perfectly. That includes, for example, Doom 3 BFG, Alien Isolation, Quake 2 and Quake 1, Dying Light, Half-Life 1 VR mod, No One Lives Forever with VR support, Penumbra, A Ghost Tale, Yooka-Laylee, and all the other games that supports the Virgin VR mod, plus many of the others I have probably just forgotten. Let's stretch it out a little bit. Let's talk about VorpX games. Well, it depends on the configuration of course. VorpX works, but you really need to put the time into tweaking it, because tweaking will be needed as VorpX really isn't made for wide field of view. But a few games has been tested and they are all working, such as Resident Evil 7, Formula 1 2017, original Fallout 4 version in VR with VorpX, Grand Theft Auto 5 with VorpX, and also Half-Life 2 with VorpX. Further on, every Steam VR application I have tried so far works out of the box with the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus, such as Big Screen, we're talking about Simple VR Player, Virtual Desktop, Whirligig Player, and a lot of others. And of course, you can expect to see loads of upcoming videos and live streams here on Survivor testing the Pimax 8K and 5K, playing simulators, VR games, mods, and much more coming up in the next weeks and months. I'm also going to use both my GTX 1080 Ti, my GTX 1070 laptop, and soon also my pre-order RTX 2080 Ti. So before we continue with the game specific test in this review and also my personal 8K versus 5K plus comparisons, summary and recommendations, make sure to subscribe to my channel now, hit that bell button for notifications, follow me on Twitter and support me on Patreon with a few bucks a month if you would like to, and I would really appreciate that. I promise I will give you the best Pimax related content on YouTube from the guy that have been using it the most. So now it's time, let's try out some VR games. For the majority part of this review and all the testing, I have been using my desktop VR rig. The PC is powered with an Intel i7 8700K processor, and it has an MSI GTX 1080 Ti Gaming X graphic card, and the RAM memory is 32GB of DDR4 4000 MHz memory. Yes, it's a beast, I know, but it's definitely needed, I promise you, and you will see that now. Almost every test is made with the wildest field of view possible, so-called large field of view in PiTool, and most of the time I'm using the Pimax 5K headsets for one simple reason. I want to show you if the VR games can hold a stable 90 frames per second. If they can, then 80 frames per second on the Pimax 8K won't be a problem either, I guess. Well, I really hope this makes sense. The PiTool render quality slider is set to 1.0 and SteamVR super sampling is set to 50% in almost every case unless I say something else. In all tests I'm using a new SteamVR application called FPS VR, which can show me an on-screen display or window at the back of one of my Vive controllers with real-time refresh rate, frame times, GPU and CPU utilization, and much more. Also remember, I'm recording this test on the same computer at the same time while I'm playing, so expect maybe 5% better performance without recording being on. So let's start off with the racing simulator Assetto Corsa. This is definitely not the most GPU demanding VR simulator, and in this test I'm running every in-game setting on maximum except for the post-processing, which I turned off. You see the FPS VR window right by my racing wheel constantly showing the real-time information. It's quite obvious that the GTX 1080 is more than enough for this simulator, and most of the time we're keeping constant 90 or even 91 frames per second. Playing Assetto Corsa on the 8K is definitely not a problem with my system either, even if I turn up the PiTool render value to 1.25 or even 1.50 if I go down with the field of view. I could even make it to run in 90 frames per second on the GTX 1070 laptop by lowering some settings and using PiTool 1 and SteamVR super sampling of 40%. I'm not really sure why the FPS VR shows 91 frames per second instead of 90 throughout the tests, but SteamVR is also reporting 91 Hz, so it might be just a bug in the current PiTool version, and I will leave this unsaid, and I assume that the shipped 5K plus units will be 90 Hz stable and not 91. Also, note that all the recordings are taken from the right eye mirror view, and it's impossible to crop it in a proper way, so the right part of the image shows a bit of the peripheral vision of the right eye, but it's not all of it. This is also why it looks a little bit stretched on your monitor, but I can assure you that it's not stretching anything, and I see no warping whatsoever while playing and looking in VR. I gotta say that driving racing simulators with wide field of view is just fantastic, as you can really tell the sense of speed thanks to the peripheral vision. And note that even when I'm looking straight forward, I can clearly see each of the 3 mirrors of this car just by moving my eyes, without even moving my head from the center position. Looking at the through the lens images and videos, you will actually realize that this simulator shows the extra clarity using the 5K plus, but in terms of screen door effect and more natural look in the horizon, I would go for the 8K. Next up, Aerofly FS2 Flight Simulator, another title which is perfectly playable with large field of view, with 90 frames per second stable on the GTX 1080 Ti, and with all settings set to max except for the shadows, which I put a little bit lower. So there is a lot of headroom to play with and get it fully smooth even on a GTX 1070. I can actually confirm that my GTX 1070 laptop was able to handle this simulator in normal field of view with a smooth 80 frames per second on the Pimax 8K, with just a few settings lowered down, as the amount of generated buildings, for example. I would actually claim that it's a little bit sharper on distance with the 8K, while the limited resolution and slightly more screen door effect on the 5K makes the horizon and buildings at distance a little bit more jagged. Skyrim VR, a game which is not really super GPU demanding unless you start to install a lot of custom mods or add loads of super sampling into the rendering in PiTool. But playing it in maximum field of view is still a challenge for a GTX 1080 Ti, both on the 5K Plus and also on the 8K, even with PiTool render set to 1.0. For this test, I'm using a vanilla version of Skyrim VR and my settings are as follows. As you can see, I'm using maximum in-game super sampling and most of the stuff relatively high in-game and also with large field of view in PiTool. As you can see, the frame rate is mostly close to 90, but there is a lot of dips as soon as we leave the town. Personally, I would recommend you to play it on normal FOV, which is 150 degrees and still very wide for this game and more than enough to really enjoy it. Going from large field of view to normal will give you a huge performance boost, and even my GTX 1070 laptop could handle it on PiTool 1.0 and SteamVR at 50% as long as you lower the in-game render scale a little bit. Looking at the through the lens shot with both Pimax 8K and 5K Plus, you will see that the screen door effect really isn't much of a deal in a game like Skyrim. It looks beautiful on both headsets, even if the 5K really has that extra clarity as I told you before. Next up, Dirt Rally. It's a tricky game to find a good balance between frame rate and image quality, and because we're using Revive to even make it to run through SteamVR, it definitely lowers the performance even more. As you probably know, ground cover is the big boy here, and turning it off in settings of the game will gain you at least 10 or even 15 frames per second more, and we can actually make it run quite stable and okay, between 80 and 90 frames at least on a GTX 1080 Ti with large field of view and medium to low overall settings in game. So if you are running this game on the Pimax 8K, you will most likely be able to find balanced settings for a stable 80 frames per second. If not, then try running normal field of view, which is still really wide. This simulator really benefits from the wide field of view and Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus. The cars really feels faster than ever and the immersion is just crazy. The Oculus home version of Dirt Rally is also playable and gives you a little better frame rate, but currently the Oculus version has a weird glitch with the Pimax 8K and 5K, so I would recommend you to run the SteamVR version, which works flawlessly. Now let's try Onward, probably the most popular multiplayer first-person shooter, and I have good news for you guys. It runs like a dream on both Pimax devices. Most of the time it runs in full frame rate and large field of view on both 5K Plus and 8K, as long as you keep PiTool on 1.0 or maximum 1.25 with a GTX 1080 Ti. On a GTX 1070 laptop, I would definitely go down to 1.0 in PiTool and maybe lower down some of the graphical settings in game, such as the shadows, to really stay with a stable frame rate. The large field of view is just fantastic in this game. It really gives you the awareness you will never have with another headset, and especially while seeing opponents sneaking up on you in your peripheral vision. That's quite crazy. Also, thanks to the high resolution panels both on the 8K and the 5K Plus, it's really easy to spot enemies on far distances, probably long before they spot you. Also, not much of a difference in image clarity or quality or sharpness using the 8K or the 5K Plus, except for a little bit more screen door effect on the 5K Plus, of course. All in all, I can truly recommend either Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus to every single Onward gamer, as it really gives you a huge advantage against your competitors while playing with this resolution and this field of view. Okay, next up, Hellblade. And well, even though the game is beautiful, it really isn't that playable on the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus, yet at least. The performance, even on medium to low settings in-game, is really bad whenever you're playing with a GTX 1080 Ti, whenever you're lowering down the field of view to normal, and the game engine is just choked trying to handle the high resolution, even with PiTool 1.0. Setting it lower than 1.0 will really make that game look ugly. Sure, it's still playable in a way, both on the 8K and 5K Plus. If you have an overclocked GTX 1080 Ti just like I have, do some adjustments in the game settings, and if you can live with 60 frames per second and a lot of reprojection, then yes, you can play it. And the 5K actually delivers a much more polished image here compared to the 8K, which definitely would need at least PiTool 1.5 to really look good. But forget about going any higher than PiTool 1.0 unless you sit on an RTX 2080 Ti maybe, who knows. Oh, and do not even try this game on a GTX 1070, there is just no point. You'll only get mad. Moving on to Project Cars 2 VR. It's one of the most popular racing simulators, but at the same time it's one of the most GPU demanding racing sims as well. I don't really understand why this game is so demanding, as I don't think the game looks so much better than Assetto Corsa for example. But anyways, running it on medium to low settings, in-game super sampling to 1.2, maybe 1.4, and PiTool on 1.0 with a GTX 1080 Ti gives you a frame rate of between 75 and 80 frames per second at most. The problem is that it looks very jaggy. Boosting the super sampling in-game makes it looks a little bit more crisper, but then we fall back to mid-40s in the frame rate, which is really bad. But wait a minute, there is still hope. I know a Polish guy called Piotr, which is an active Pimax forum community member under the name YataPL, and he sent me one of his ready-made configuration files for Project Cars 2, and guess what? Wow, now the game starts to shine, both on the 8K and the 5K Plus. I'm sure you can even see the difference in the recordings here, just as you're watching. It's super sharp, it's crisp, you can really distinguish things in far horizon and distance, and it actually runs still quite okay, around 60 frames per second, at least on PiTool 1.0 and Steam VR a little bit higher as well, around 70%. Well, it's far from good frame rate, but I think that leaves some headrooms for tweaking, and if you really spend some time finding the good balance between image quality and performance, maybe this game could be able to run in kind of a stable frame rate, or at least if you go down to normal field of view, which I'm not doing in this video. Anyway, big thanks for the config files, Piotr. By the way, Project Cars 1 works almost the same with the same performance and settings, but doesn't look as good as Project Cars 2, both on the 8K and the 5K Plus. Now let's try Elite Dangerous, a game with a huge amount of VR players and enthusiasts. If you're one of them, of course, you should go for the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus just to be able to fly in space and with the wild field of view. It's a pretty cool feeling, to be honest, even though I'm not a real Elite Dangerous fan. The game runs okay on both Pimax 8K and 5K Plus. If you tweak the settings a little bit, run the game in normal field of view, which I highly recommend, and set the best balance for image quality versus performance in the game settings, such as the two different super sampling options. These are very important. It really isn't that hard to reach 80 or even 90 frames per second stable in Elite Dangerous, but the problem is, how beautiful do you want this game to be? I tried to boost the super sampling in-game between 1.25 up to 1.75, and then it got crazy sharp. It looked beautiful, especially on the 8K, which really makes the small text fully readable, but it was almost the same sharpness on the 5K Plus, of course. But the problem with boosting the super sampling is low frame rates. Today's graphic cards can't really make Elite Dangerous both beautiful and sharp and smooth on neither of the Pimax headsets, unfortunately. Maybe the RTX family will, maybe it won't. Either way, Elite Dangerous is impressive on the Pimax despite the poor black levels and despite not being able to max out the game sharpness and graphics, but you really need to try it. Okay, let's go on with IL-2 Sturmovik, one of my favorite flight simulators in VR, which both looks beautiful and feels awesome doing fast dogfights with wide field of view. This game does run quite okay on the Pimax headsets, considering it being an advanced flight simulator, but using large FOV, as I did in this video, was nearly impossible to reach stable 90 frames per second on a GTX 1080 Ti. You have also more chance to get this simulator fully smooth while playing it on the 8K and also with normal field of view. And personally, I would say this simulator looks a bit better on the 8K as well. You can maybe see it in the through the lens photos, or maybe you don't. This simulator really doesn't show its potential until you start to raise the PiTool slider. While playing it with PiTool 1.0 and SteamVR super sampling at 50%, there were loads of jagged edges despite anti-aliasing being maxed out. It didn't really feel polished enough. This is also what many backers said during the Berlin meetup 2 weeks ago, so I tried to run the game with PiTool 1.5 this time, with SteamVR super sampling only set to 30%. I turned off the in-game anti-aliasing and wow, what a difference! Now the game was much sharper, much more details in the distance, and for some weird reason the frame rates did not even decrease. Playing it on the 5K Plus while recording this video, I had between 75 to 90 frames per second, and the majority of the time was above 80 frames, so fully playable. This means also if you're running it on 8K, you will most likely have a stable frame rate of 80 frames per second if you just tweak the game settings a little. Okay, the first Oculus home game, Lucky's Tale. It runs perfectly both on the GTX 1080 Ti and also GTX 1070 if you run it through PiTool My Games launcher and not with Revive. Running it with Revive and SteamVR, you will have some frame drops and lower performance on a GTX 1070, but the 1080 Ti handles this pretty well. This is really a beautiful game on the Pimax headsets, especially on the Pimax 5K Plus, which brings out the super clarity in the image, but it looks great on the 8K as well, of course. Check out the through the lens shots I made and you will see the difference. The screen door effect is almost completely gone, but if you look for it, of course you're gonna see it. And again, the difference between 5K and 8K is not that big after all. Lone Echo, another Oculus exclusive. It starts perfectly running it with the PiTool My Games launcher without any SteamVR in the background, and it runs really well on my GTX 1080 Ti, even while recording it, most of the time in full 90 frames per second. The game footage may look a little bit weird and stretched in this video, but remember, this is only what you see in the mirror view on your monitor. In the headsets, it's fully perfect perspective and no stretching and no warping whatsoever. I need to admit that this game looks amazing in wide field of view, and it looks sharp and polished both on the 8K and the 5K. You can of course change loads of the game settings, so there's a lot of headroom to make the frame rate stable, maybe even on a GTX 1070. In this test, I'm running this with only PiTool 1.0, and while SteamVR is not even running, you cannot downsample the SteamVR super sampling, so I'm basically rendering the game in pure PiTool 1.0 resolution, which is more than enough. It's remarkable how the 5K Plus actually manages to look almost better in terms of screen door effect here. Either way, it's funny how Oculus made such a stunning game for the Oculus Rift, but not until now we can actually really see the beauty of it, floating around in this spaceship in wild field of view with stunning image quality and sharpness. It really makes me want to play it all over again. Fallout 4 VR then, well, you know it already. It's practically impossible to make it to run with a stable frame rate, even on a GTX 1080 Ti with a Vive Pro. And especially without any motion reprojection as the Oculus or the Windows Mixed Reality headsets are using. Of course, it is playable on the Pimax 8K and 5K, but it doesn't look that great, mainly because you cannot afford to add any in-game super sampling. Not even a GTX 1080 Ti can handle it. Running the game in 60 to 70 frames per second is quite okay, but once you dip down below 50, then it's really a pain. And I really wonder if the upcoming RTX 2080 Ti will be able to manage it with maximum frame rate. Well, most likely not. And forget about everything lower than 1080 Ti. It's really a bad VR implementation, so we cannot really blame on the Pimax this time. So how about iRacing, the racing simulator that maybe has the biggest community online of them all? Well, I have owned iRacing for quite a long time now, but I have never really given it a fair chance. And what a surprise, I would say. Damn, this simulator looks stunning in high resolution and large field of view, both on the 8K and the 5K actually. whereas the 8K takes a little bit of the edge at the far distance with less screen door effect of course, but the resolution, the clarity using these settings I'm just showing you in game, together with PiTool 1.0 and SteamVR super sampling at 50% makes this game crazy in terms of clarity and definitely the most sharp and polished racing simulator I have seen so far. You can practically see miles away. Seriously, this should be one of the showcases for the Pimax VR headsets that really is demonstrating the potential of wide field of view and especially the high resolution panels. I know this YouTube clip won't show you the real sharpness, but believe me when I say it, it looks incredible. The performance is mostly great as well. I was using quite high settings and also large field of view, so I had some frame drops down to 80 or mid 80 on the Pimax 5K Plus, but running it on the 8K gave me almost constant full frame rate. On my GTX 1070 laptop I had to lower the anti-aliasing and some other in-game settings, but I could still maintain mostly stable 80 frames per second with the Pimax 8K. This is seriously becoming one of my favorite racing sims on the Pimax headsets. So now Alien Isolation in VR, definitely the most appreciated VR mod ever done and still one of the most scary and best VR mods I've ever played, despite being a sitting down experience. Luckily, it runs very good on the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus and looks mostly the same on both headsets in terms of sharpness and image quality. I won't say it's super sharp as I can't really find the settings to bump up the resolution and keep the frame rate stable, but overall it's a very pleasant experience with the wide field of view on the Pimax. Having that said, despite being an old game, it's still quite GPU demanding, at least in VR, and while my GTX 1080 Ti can handle most of it, in between 80 and 90 frames per second, I would say that the GTX 1070 laptop was struggling a lot, at least with PiTool 1.0 and SteamVR super sampling at 50%. So if you want to meet Alien in the tunnels again, this time in wide field of view, you will need a quite beefy graphic card for this one. Subnautica, well, what a beautiful game. The Pimax 8K as well as the 5K Plus really makes it more immersive with the wide field of view, and it adds so much more into the feeling being deep down under the surface. The HUD in the game is aligned perfectly, the menus and all the small text is fully readable thanks to the high resolution panels, and while the frame rate isn't that great to be honest, it's still surprisingly playable even on the GTX 1080 Ti with a large field of view actually, and yeah, I get frame drops down to 70 or so, but still fully playable. I have actually played this game for hours with my GTX 1070 laptop with the Pimax 8K, and no, it won't be fully stable 80 frames per second, but if you remove some of the hidden settings in-game using the console, you can actually make it to run pretty well even on the GTX 1070 with PiTool 1.0 and SteamVR around 40% super sampling. All in all, this is a game that really deserves a wide field of view and the high resolution panels. You really need to try it on your Pimax. The sharpness is great and the black colors are totally fine even in the darkest caves. DCS World 2.5 or Digital Combat Simulator, this is my favorite VR flight simulator. I have spent more than $400 on already. If you have seen my previous FA-18 Hornet videos, you may know how much I really enjoy flying around in those fighter jets. This is one of those flight simulators I have been really looking forward to play on my Pimax. The problem is though, I totally forgot that I was using motion reprojection when I was playing it on the Samsung Odyssey. Now I really remember how I got it so smooth. Unfortunately, this game really needs motion reprojection, or maybe RTX 2080 Ti, I don't know, but currently playing it on the Pimax 8K or the 5K Plus is really not really a great experience. It's not that the image quality is bad, it actually is quite great, but well, actually you need to put the PiTool settings to 1.5 before this simulator actually starts to shine and look sharp and beautiful as expected on the Pimax headsets. But once you enter the cockpit, you really realize that your PC starts to act like a potato. the frame rate is really low, mostly between 30 and 40 frames per second, sometimes even lower. Well, if we had a functional Brainwarp, a motion reprojection or whatever, this could be totally fine. Unfortunately, we don't have that yet, and that's a shame. So, well, I think I will just wait a little bit longer until my RTX 2080 Ti arrives and I can hopefully start to fly my FN18 Hornet again, this time in wide field of view. Stand Out, a very cool PUBG clone in VR and still one of my favorite first-person shooters to just jump into online occasionally. This game runs great on both the 8K and the 5K Plus, but I must say that the 8K really shines here, as you will see more details at far distance thanks to the screen door effect mainly. And on the GTX 1080 Ti, it runs butter smooth almost constantly on max settings in-game. And using my GTX 1070 laptop, you will get some deeps even down to 70s or mid 70s, but overall it's still fully playable on the Pimax with a GTX 1070, especially on the Pimax 8K, as you only need 80 frames per second. The game is also surprisingly sharp even with PiTool 1.0. Anyway, just like Onward, you get a huge advantage seeing further away with high resolution panels. With the wide field of view, you can really see your enemies moving in your peripheral vision, and I can really see a lot of first-person gamers go with the Pimax just because of this reason. The 8K and the 5K Plus really makes the game look better and also a bit easier to master. Now rFactor 2, a racing simulator in the shadow of many others. I don't know, I have just not given this simulator a chance since I played it for the first time when it officially got VR support. It is immersive with wide field of view and high resolution panels, but for some reason, no matter what setting I was using, I could still see jagged edges at distance and in the horizon. Well, the resolution scaling seems to be a little bit off here, no matter if I use PiTool 1 or 1.5 or even 1.75, it always looked a little bit jaggy in the edges and I could not find any anti-aliasing option either. On the top of that, the frame rate is so-so on the GTX 1080 Ti and balancing between 60 and 70 frames per second, well, you could call it fully playable, just like the Project Cars 1 and 2, but I was expecting more. I gotta say, I really love The Forest VR. It's a beautiful game, it's challenging, and it's still one of the most creepy survivor horror games I've ever played in VR. It works on the Pimax of course, but we really need more GPU power, unless you want to play it with heavy reprojection. My GTX 1080 Ti is choking and giving me between 50 maybe 60 frames per second in game, and on the GTX 1070 laptop it's totally unplayable. Also, PiTool 1.0 seems not to be enough, and not until I pushed the PiTool to 1.5 I started to see the real sharpness with less jagged edges in this game. But then it runs like a slideshow almost, so the Forest is definitely nothing for you unless you're sitting on a pre-order on an RTX 2080 Ti, I would say. Now let's try Pavlov. This is one of my favorite first-person shooters, which runs beautifully on the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus, on a GTX 1080 Ti, but also on the GTX 1070. Graphics are sharp, it looks very polished in terms of image quality, and as I previously said, the wide field of view combined with the high resolution panels adds so much advantages to the gameplay. It's easy to aim on distance, easy to spot your opponents in the right moment, and if you play a lot of Pavlov, then you should seriously consider any of the upcoming Pimax headsets. Both the 8K and the 5K Plus really shines here, but once again 8K takes a slight lead here with more details on far distance. It's not much, but the difference is still there. The maps may not be as huge in Pavlov as they are in Onward, but the fine pixels can really distinguish an enemy sneaking far behind any tree or building. The screen door effect may once again not be a game changer here between the 8K and the 5K Plus, but on the other hand, the 5K brings out the picture clarity in this game, which I personally actually prefer, well, in front of the perfect resolution, I would say. RaceRoom Racing Experience is the last racing simulator in my lineup today, and to be honest, I'm not quite familiar with this one, but I have been testing it a couple of times now during my Pimax 8K M1 testings, and now I also got the chance to try it with the Pimax 5K Plus, and I can just tell you that RaceRoom is really sharp and it looks beautiful with the wide field of view, but for some weird reason it actually looks better on the 5K compared to the 8K. So maybe it is the clarity this time that is better than the resolution on distance, but also the image at distance and horizon really feels detailed on the 5K, maybe even better than on the 8K. The performance is really awesome, and the GTX 1080 Ti can play it in perfect 90 and 80 frames per second depending on which Pimax headset you use, and also my GTX 1070 laptop could handle it almost butter smooth as long as I lowered some in-game settings. And lastly, our last game test for today is the X-Plane 11, my absolute favorite flight simulator all time. Unfortunately, this simulator is a big disappointment on both the Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K Plus, not only in terms of performance but also image sharpness and clarity. I would say that Aerofly FS2 looks much better on the Pimax, and on top of that runs butter smooth. Well, X-Plane 11 is just badly optimized game, or well, simulator, and the only way to really enjoy it right now is to run it with motion reprojection or the ASW that Oculus Rift is using. As Pimax so far lacks these options, you can expect the frame rates go really low, below 40 frames per second, sometimes 30, and I have seen lower. Once you put PiTool at 1.5 at least, this makes the game really sharp and it looks quite okay, but the single threaded rendering that is made in this simulator, it's just killing the performance. Who knows, maybe the RTX 2080 Ti might help, or maybe it won't, but until then I will leave my X-Plane 11 untouched on my PC, waiting for better days. So guys, enough with the game testings for now. Finally, we have come to the point where I'm gonna put 8K and the 5K Plus head to head, and I'm gonna give you some information that you might not know about that you really should know, because well, the only official difference on paper between the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus are the LCD panels, which are different. They have different RGB pixel matrix, and they're also processing the image in a different way, where the 8K is actually upscaling the image while the 5K Plus is doing it natively. But is there anything more I can tell you about the difference between the panels except for the obvious screen door effect and so? Well, yes, let me point out a few observations that might be very interesting for you to know about. First of all, the contrast. The contrast levels are slightly better on the 8K compared to the 5K Plus. I noticed that during several scenes in Elite Dangerous, but also in semi-dark scenes in Steam VR environment and other games. In high contrast scenes, the black simply feels more black on the Pimax 8K. The difference is not huge, but it's still noticeable, maybe 5% more in total. Next up, the black levels. Just as the contrast, I feel that the black levels are slightly better on the 8K compared to the 5K Plus. It's not by far, but it's actually a noticeable difference in games like Elite Dangerous once again, and also in Hellblade and other dark VR horror games like Paranormal Activity, for example. Moving on, we have the color temperature and white balance. This is a very strange one, to be honest. I can clearly see that the white balance or the color temperature, I'm not sure which one it really is, it differs between the headsets. The Pimax 8K produces slightly more warmer and reddish colors, while the 5K Plus has a little bit more colder look into the colors and a little bit more bluish color palette. If you really look closer, you can see it almost every time in every game. It may be because of one of my units being not perfectly calibrated, I don't know, but I'm just telling you my observation, and well, basically the whole review is based on these two units, so I just need to tell you the difference. Apart from that, we have the color intensity, which also differs between the units. Well, I also noticed that the color feels more saturated on the Pimax 8K. It feels a little bit strange as the new LCD panels on the 5K Plus are supposed to give improved color production, right? In my observations, the 8K has tiny little bit better and stronger color palette, and this has nothing to do with the color hue or color temperature that I mentioned before. Next up, color banding. While being in Steam VR dashboard, I'm not talking about Steam VR Home Beta right now, I'm talking about the dashboard having one of the default backgrounds active with some stars, some planets and the Vive logo. I can clearly distinguish some color banding while using the 5K Plus. With the 8K, I do not see that, and I cannot see any color banding at all whatsoever. I have also seen this a couple of times in very dark horror games, just like Paranormal Activity. There is also a strange dot pattern here on the 5K. Well, during my testings, I have noticed a couple of times that the Pimax 5K Plus panels has a strange pattern of a very subtle dots across the whole panels. Most of the time you won't even see it at all, but looking at orange backgrounds specifically, I could tell you that those tiny dots gets quite visible. It's like there is a very subtle dot every 10th pixel or something like that, and it's not perfectly straight formation or so, but it's still a clear pattern. This is definitely not distracting. The dots are, well, almost invisible, and it's not an issue for me, and I guess 99 out of 100 times you won't even see the dots, but I just want to let you know that I've seen them. So we also have some jagged edges, and those are mainly concerning the 8K. As mentioned a lot of time before, the Pimax 8K needs much higher resolution to really make up for the 4K panel and the upscaler to really look good. Once you put high resolution enough, it will look fantastic and definitely sharper than the 5K Plus. But if you don't, then you can expect a more jagged edges and more aliasing in games and image overall. It's just something frustrating that the rendered resolution, it's not enough unless you go with PiTool 1.5 or something, and the downscale and then upscale image, once again, it's internally made, and for some reason it just screws something up. This is my biggest problem with the 8K, no doubt, even though it's not a big problem, but it's still there. And if I compare it with the 5K, I would say the 5K Plus wins here. And lastly, text readability. Okay, I said it before that the 8K has slightly more detail to the text, mainly because of the high resolution and the less screen door effect, of course. In Elite Dangerous, that's quite obvious and easy to spot, but when looking at tiny black text on white or very light backgrounds, I would say that the readability is better on the 5K Plus actually. The clarity of the native 5K Plus rendering to the panels makes the text just more crisp. The clarity of the native 5K rendering to the panel straight without any upscaling makes the text a little bit more crisp and easier to read. This is something that you might consider if you're planning to do a lot of desktop work in documents while being in VR or something like that. Here, the 5K Plus is simply the one taking the edge. So this was my additional observations when comparing the 5K Plus together with the 8K, and among all the other things I have been discussing throughout this review, I think none of these differences are a real game changer here or a deal breaker, I would say. But apparently there is more into the different panels in both headsets that we officially know so far. I really hope this will further help you in your big decision of choosing between the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus depending on your needs. And now you may wonder, which headset would I personally choose if I just had to pick one of them, the 8K or the 5K Plus? I would say the units are very similar, so the choice I'm gonna make now is definitely not so obvious choice, and I think I will need to spend some more time with both of the headsets than just 2 weeks to really compare them with more games, with more experience set, and get some more time with them. But for now, I would say that the Pimax 5K Plus has really surprised me in a very positive way, and today I would personally choose the Pimax 5K Plus Plus instead of the 8K as my only VR headset, mainly for two reasons. And these reasons are, first off, image clarity. I just love it. The native rendered 1440p signal is the clear winner here, well, at least if you ask me. Despite the slightly more screen door effect and the panels having a lower resolution, most VR games just look more clean and more crisp and just looks better on the Pimax 5K Plus. I know that the 8K has an advantage in simulators with less screen door effect, and me being a regular VR simulator gamer, you might think I'm taking a strange decision here, but looking at the big picture, I'm not only a VR simmer, but I also play all sorts of VR games, and I'm an enthusiast in general, and in the majority of VR content, the 5K Plus image quality just looks more polished. And my second reason for this is also the lower requirements. I know what you think. I have a GTX 1080 Ti and soon also the RTX 2080 Ti. It's a great piece of hardware that actually should be able to power the Pimax headsets in most games with perfect frame rate. But no, this is not the case. If you look at some of the simulators just as I play them, the Project Cars 2, the Digital Combat Simulator, or even third-person games like Hellblade, you can clearly see that the GTX 1080 Ti is not able to handle it with acceptable frame rate. And I'm not really sure if the RTX 2080 Ti will do that either, but I really hate playing games with reprojection and I always prefer full smooth frame rate. And using the 8K, you really need to push the boundaries of the resolution higher and higher to really get the acceptable image quality, while with the 5K Plus you can just go a little bit lower and still have a very good image quality and of course then better frame rate. So that's why I feel I really want to play the simulators and games in 90 frames per second one day, and I think Pimax 5K Plus is the device that can make it happen much sooner, with lower resolution, with worse screen door effect, but still with a perfect frame rate and a great looking image overall. So yes guys, this was my two reasons why I prefer the 5K Plus so far instead of the 8K overall. And no, this has nothing to do with the 80 Hz refresh rate on the 8K, and to be honest, I don't find the screen door effect difference being that big between the 8K and the 5K overall as well. At least in most VR games, you will not even notice the difference anyway. The screen door effect is really awesome on the 5K Plus as well, and I really mean it. It's clearly better than the Samsung Odyssey, and the image quality overall, once again, the clarity is the best I have seen in a virtual reality headset as of today. Having that said, as a last note, I need to add that both the Pimax 8K and the Pimax 5K Plus are definitely the two best headsets on the market today. Personally, I think Pimax doesn't even have any competition at the moment. With the ultra-wide field of view, with the great image quality on both headsets, all the functionality just as working as expected, with the awesome software compatibility, the Steam Lighthouse tracking support, and the outstanding comfort in design, I gotta say we have two winners here, not only one, and both are from the Pimax camp. And to all of you that are still watching this video, even though it's quite long, I can assure you that there will be loads of more content and in-depth videos, testings and everything regarding the Pimax 8K and the 5K Plus on my channel here on Survivor from now on. If there's anything I have forgotten to add or cover in this review, please let me know and I will add that in my follow-ups. There will be more testings, more benchmarks, more gameplays, tutorials, accessory reviews, and well, a lot of other cool stuff in the upcoming weeks and months. So as I already have said a couple of times before, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit that bell button, and prepare yourself for another exciting ride coming up very soon. Lastly, I just need to add this: great job Pimax, you have definitely met our expectations now, and you will for sure shake the VR industry completely. I'm looking forward to see your progress and improvements, development of upcoming Pimax accessories, and of course also the Pimax 8K X next year. And also thank you so much to the whole company and the Pimax forums community for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this development and improvement of this great product. I feel honored and I'm very happy how this all came together at the end, despite delays and some struggles. Also, a big thanks to all of the other Pimax 8K M1 beta testers in our group for the great cooperation and a lovely time together. Also, a big thanks to every single community member of the Pimax forums for all the support, for all your help, for your suggestions and ideas you have given me and the Pimax during the past months. And of course, a special thanks to the 2 beta testers and my lovely friends Sebastian from the MRTV YouTube channel and Thomas from the Voodoo DE. It was a pleasure doing this journey together with you, and this is just the beginning. Thank you so much, guys. I really hope this video was helpful for you. It took me around 180 hours to make this video and another 3 months to even test out everything that I just shared with you. Guys, I'm gonna do a live stream tomorrow, Monday night. So if you have any questions, please join my live stream tomorrow and I will try to reply all of you. I promise you, if it takes 3 hours more, I'm gonna be there for you. Thank you so much again and see you tomorrow. Cheers.